Northern suddenly paused mid-conversation, causing Cryos to look at him strangely. What? A shadow fell across Northern's face as he felt Revant's dwindling consciousness. Revant was first a result of his cloning talent before being bound through the void. So Northern had a vague suspicion that all his summons created using his clones were still accessible to him. But he couldn't feel them vividly and couldn't feed them essence like he used to. Northern's expression turned cold, and the next moment he vanished. As he disappeared from before Cryos, the shadows beyond Revant rose and Northern tore through them, rushing toward Revant. Revant had collapsed face down on the ground. A gaping hole punched through his black drape, the fabric soaked with blood. Northern's eyes trembled as he turned and pulled Revant upright. No, 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 no. Revant stared at Northern with those dark, hollow eyes, pure disdain radiating from them. You incompetent landlord. What are you? He coughed blood. Northern's frown deepened, dark and dangerous. Don't talk. Don't do anything. I can heal you. Revant slapped his hand away and roared. Why are you here? He coughed up an alarming amount of blood. Fascinating that with such a massive hole in his stomach, he could still cling to life. But his time was running out. May I make a suggestion? I know. I'll heal him with infinite iteration. Yes. But the result is uncertain due to the void's influence. Ah, right. Now that the void is corrupted, that suddenly sounds far more dangerous than I thought. What do you suggest? Form can be created by analysis and copy. Echo can be created by defeat and death. Endless and Omniform are woven to create each echo. While still maintaining their past abilities, they're imbued with the capacity to grow, evolve, even without advanced fusion and recursive generation. Northern's jaw clenched as understanding crashed through him. His hands, still reaching for Revant, trembled, not with fear, but with the crushing weight of the choice. Revant's hollow eyes narrowed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You need to leave. That bastard is plotting something. Northern's grip on Revant loosened. The mask, that flimsy fiction of reluctance, was nowhere to be found. Instead, his face showed pure, razor-sharp calculation. Knowing he could fix Revant brought comfort, but it didn't ease the fact that he'd have to watch him die. Worse, kill him. Revant coughed, more blood spilling. You incompetent bastard. Stop staring at me like that. Like I'm already dead? You are. You just don't know it yet. Revant tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet, rattling wheeze. I'm tougher than I look. I'm the... Leave. Damn it. Northern spoke in a simple tone. No performance in his words. No reluctance. I can't leave. You belong to me, and I don't let what's mine stay broken. Northern raised his hand. Seeing it made Revant frown even in his dying state. Hell, no. Northern, expression cold, drove his hand into Revant's throat, pushing deeper. The tyrant stared at Northern with cold, hateful fury, as though his eyes were clawing at life with the sole passion of destroying him. I'm sorry, Northern muttered as he watched Revant's last breath leave. He withdrew his hand slowly, blood dripping from his fingers as Revant's body went limp. The hollow eyes that had burned with such hatred now stared at nothing, empty and still. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Northern felt a pull. This wasn't like copying a form. This was different, deeper, more intimate. His Shingon activated involuntarily, the demon eye flaring to life as it analyzed the corpse before him. But this time, it wasn't just scanning structure and abilities. It was reading the essence of his soul, the signature of death, the echo of what Revant had been. Analysis complete. Tyrant of despair, Hamel. Soul signature, void entity. Cause of death. Master's hand. Echo creation initiated. Northern watched as dark threads, not physical, but visible only to his perception, began weaving themselves from Revant's corpse. They spiraled upward like smoke, coalescing into something between solid and ethereal. Then he felt a subtle hum, like something waking within him. Hungry. Soul forge active. Storing defeated entity. Blueprint acquired. Tyranny of despair. Endless integration beginning. The threads condensed, pulled into Northern's chest where the soul forge resided. He could feel it, like swallowing something massive, something that didn't quite fit. His essence churned, his soul stretching to accommodate this new weight. And then, Echo created. Hamel, Tyrant of Despair. Variants generated. 2. Hamel, Original Despair Aura, Void Corruption, Tyrant's Will. Hamel Prime, Variant 1, Enhanced Despair Manipulation, Emotional Hemorrhage. Hollow King, Variant 2, Absolute Nullification Aura, Existential Dread. Northern exhaled slowly. The corpse before him began dissolving into black ash, scattering into nothingness as if it had never existed. The soul forge had consumed every trace. Now came the part he wasn't looking forward to. He closed his eyes and reached into the forge. Inside the soul forge, a vast gray expanse stretched endlessly. The 5 square kilometer space felt larger than it should, distorted by the weight of what it contained. And there, standing in the center of the emptiness, was Revunt, or Hamel, as the Aoi had addressed him. Northern was curious why Revunt was addressed as Hamel, but he had a vague suspicion. Echinization had likely realized Revunt's true nature, something that existed far deeper than his abilities could currently grasp. Hamel looked exactly as he had moments before death. Black drapes soaked in blood, hollow eyes burning with cold fury. But now he was whole. No wound in his stomach. No blood dripping from his mouth. He stared down at his feet for a few moments, frozen, then slowly raised his head to meet Northern's gaze, his eyes trembling with a turbulent pool of emotions that worried Northern. Revunt. The moment their eyes locked, he moved, faster than Northern expected. Revunt's fist slammed into Northern's jaw, sending him skidding backward across the gray ground. The impact echoed through the soul forge, rippling across the empty space like a stone thrown into still water. "You bastard!" Revunt's voice was a roar, laced with despair so thick it felt like the air itself was drowning. His aura of despair exploded outward, and Northern felt it immediately. A crushing weight on his chest. A whisper in his mind telling him everything was hopeless. That nothing mattered. That he should just surrender. Northern gritted his teeth and stood, grinning. Crap. This bastard's grown tenfold more powerful. Northern's eyes flashed cold with a vicious grin. It was obvious that Revunt had gained tremendous power by realizing his potential through the variations he'd created. He could now switch between his prime tyrant form and a new being called Hollow King, though all existed within the same person. Hamel charged again, despair radiating from him in suffocating waves, his fist cocked back for another strike. Northern sidestepped the blow clean, efficient, then drove his knee into Hamel's ribs with bone-cracking force. The Echo staggered, but Northern was already moving. Elbow to the back of the skull, slamming Hamel's face into the gray ground. The tyrant tried to rise. Northern stomped on his spine, pinning him flat. Hamel's aura intensified, despair clawing at Northern's mind like fingers prying at his skull. Northern felt it. The weight, the emptiness, the soul-crushing hopelessness. He ignored it. His fist came down. Once, twice, 3 times. Each impact cracked against Hamel's skull, sending shockwaves rippling through the soul forge. Hamel roared, void energy erupting from his body in a violent explosion that hurled Northern back several meters. The tyrant rose, blood streaming from his nose, his hollow eyes blazing with fury. Dark tendrils of void spiraled around him, and the air itself warped and twisted. Northern landed in a crouch, then launched forward. Hamel swung. Northern ducked under it, his palm striking Hamel's solar plexus with surgical precision. The Echo's breath expelled in a violent gasp. Before Hamel could recover, Northern's knee found his jaw. Teeth cracked. Blood sprayed. Hamel stumbled back, but Northern didn't let up. Precise strike to the throat. A palm to the chest that sent Hamel flying backward. The tyrant crashed into the gray ground, skidding dozens of meters before finally stopping. He tried to push himself up. His arms shook. Blood pooled beneath him. Northern walked forward slowly, deliberately. No rush. A small smile played on his face. Hamel's face flashed with terror, confusion. The next moment, his despair aura pulsed desperately, trying to drown Northern in hopelessness. But Northern's expression never changed. Cold, smiling. Hamel managed to get to one knee before Northern's boot connected with his face, snapping his head back and sending him sprawling again. Northern stood over him, watching as Hamel coughed blood, his hollow eyes dimming, his body trembling. The tyrant tried to speak. Northern's foot pressed down on his chest, pinning him to the ground. Hamel's fingers clawed at Northern's boot, void energy flickering weakly around his hands before dissipating entirely. Hamel's struggles weakened. His breathing became ragged. His eyes, once blazing with fury, now stared up at Northern with something else. Recognition. Then Northern laughed and withdrew his leg. Ah, that was fun. So much fun. I've always been curious about how I'd fare fighting you. Thank God I didn't try it before now. Hamel slowly stood up. In addition to his slightly taller frame, the color of his eyes had become gray. I didn't kill you, by the way. I mean, common sense, how are you alive right now? Driving my hand through your gut was the only way to save you. That's difficult to believe with how you were smiling just now. Northern laughed again. Oh, I enjoyed beating your ass. Hamel was silent for a moment. Then he slowly stood, examining his body. What did you do to me? He gave Northern a questioning look. What have you become? Northern just kept smiling, then asked, How do you feel? You seem to have gotten your prime powers back. And more. What about your memories, Hamel? His eyes widened for a moment, surprised. Then the shock dissipated. Of course you'd know. Hamel's eyes flew open. That bastard. Damn it. What are you doing here? Where is Cryos? Northern frowned. I can't let my subordinates die. Hamel shouted with urgency. You need to get Chaos Prince now. Leave the reflective bastard to me. Northern's expression darkened, and immediately the gray vastness around them vanished. But instead of appearing on the fractured land, they materialized at the desert's edge. Northern glanced up, a deep frown creasing his face. What is? Chaos Prince was up there in the sky. Kal was too, and Cryos was between them, dissolving. Northern's eyes flared the moment he realized it, and he shot upward between the two of them. Both flew back from the impact as he caught Cryos, soaring higher with him. He held the origin of madness by the collar and looked down at him for a moment, registering how terrified, and at the same time how devastated, he looked. His body was breaking apart, and something was leaking out from beneath him. Take it back, he rasped. Take it back. Now. I'd rather give it to you than let that unfilial worm have it. Aoi. Based on your current abilities, you cannot copy chaos. However, Cryos can be echanized. Northern was confused for a moment. Cryos was an origin. Was it possible? Was he powerful enough to kill an origin? Right now, due to a rare artifact, Cryos has been mortalized. This is causing catastrophic leakage in his soul essence and all its conduits. Hence, he can be killed. If you want to preserve chaos as an echo, you will have to kill him now. It's useless, whatever you're trying to do, partner. Chaos Prince shouted as he flew closer. I spent 3,000 years designing a dagger that can kill an origin, and orchestrated this entire moment to test it on my father. That way, the origins won't know of its existence. Indeed, he made his decision to come all the way here. I knew he would make such a decision, so I made it part of the plan. Right, friend? He glanced at Kal, who was standing somewhere on the ground. The essence flowing out of Cryos was splitting in two directions, streaming toward both of them. Northern pressed his lips together, realizing he'd been wrong the entire time. But not entirely. He had suspected and been wary of the Chaos Prince, just not to this magnitude. He'd never thought that Kal was aiding Chaos Prince and not Cryos. No, could it even be called that? They seemed to be in alliance, one that Kal stood to benefit from. And Northern instantly figured it out. Chaos Prince wanted to test if he could kill Origins for obvious reasons. and Kaal wants to become an Origin to fight his father. The two of them have a common enemy. He gritted his teeth and gripped Cryos' face. I'm not sorry for this. Chaos Prince's smirk vanished the moment he noticed something. Ice immediately engulfed the Origin, but it didn't stop the essence leakage. At once, that ice shattered and scattered into tiny fragments. The next moment, a terrifying explosion devoured the land and spread across the vast continent, shrouding everything in white. White light devoured everything. Northern materialized within his soul forge, Cryos' lifeless body cradled in his arms. The gray vastness trembled around him, forcing his gaze to sweep the space. What is going on? Warning. Soul Forge experiencing unprecedented strain. Origin-level essence detected. Initiating emergency stabilization protocols. A large amount of an unprecedented and divine existence has been noticed. The force is spreading. Soul Forge is evolving. Northern frowned. He knew immediately. My soul is reacting to the return of chaos. To put it better, Demon of Form is attempting to tame chaos. Northern felt the urge to laugh, but the trembling intensified. The growing tremors threatened to tear the very space apart. Isn't that endearing? Indeed. However, I am not the one who wants an Origin to become his echo. Hey, you suggested it. Well said. Suggested. Silent disbelief settled over Northern. Nice one, you one-dimensional lodestar. Northern laid Cryos down gently on the fractured ground. The Origin of madness looked almost peaceful in death, his expression frozen between terror and relief. Anyway, echonize him. Acknowledged. Echo creation requires complete soul absorption. Warning. This will fundamentally alter Soul Forge structure. Northern fell silent for a moment, but the return of chaos would certainly change everything regardless. Do it. The moment Northern spoke, Cryos' body began dissolving. Not into nothingness, but into pure white essence. Streams of power spiraled upward like ribbons of liquid light, chaos swirling among them in violent, beautiful patterns of primordial entropy. The Soul Forge responded. The gray vastness beneath Northern's feet fractured further. But it didn't separate or collapse. Instead, it transformed. Ice erupted from the fissures, spreading in crystalline waves that raced across the infinite expanse. Within seconds, the ground had become frozen tundra, permafrost stretching as far as Northern could see. Snow began falling from a sky that moments ago hadn't existed, each flake perfect and eternal. Northern watched in awe as a mountain rose in the distance, a glacial titan of blue-white ice piercing through clouds still forming. Its peaks glittered with ancient frost, and auroras danced around its summit in impossible colors. The transformation didn't stop. The ground trembled again. To the east, ice gave way to volcanic rock. Obsidian plains cracked open, revealing veins of molten light beneath. A massive red mine erupted from the earth, its entrance yawning wide like a wound in reality itself. The glow from within pulsed with heat and promise, casting crimson shadows across the frozen landscape. Beyond the glacial mountain, impossibly far yet somehow visible, a volcano took shape. Its caldera blazed with primordial fire, lava flowing in rivers that somehow never reached the ice. Yet their heat could be felt even here. Ash and embers drifted upward, mingling with falling snow in a dance of opposing elements. 3 distinct terrains, ice, earth, fire, separated by vast distances yet flowing together in impossible harmony. This was how it existed in the limitless void. Northern's face froze with half-formed laughter. It's even better. Feels more real. The Soul Forge had evolved from a gray void into a living world. Soul Forge expansion complete. New specifications. Size. Tier 2, 50 square kilometers. Terrain. Tripartite domain, glacial north, volcanic south, crimson depths. Time flow. 1 second equals 15 seconds. Echoes. 1 stored. Northern's attention snapped back to the center, where Cryos' essence had condensed into a single point of brilliant white light, pulsing, writhing, alive with power that threatened to tear space itself. The essence coalesced, pulling inward with terrible force. Northern felt his soul resonate with the process, the demon of form reaching out with invisible threads to weave the origin back together. Not as he was, but as something new, something bound. Beginning echo formation. Warning. Origin level soul detected. Chaos essence integration at 47%, 68%, 89%. Stabilization processing. Northern gritted his teeth as he felt the strain. His soul was literally trying to contain and reshape an origin, a being that had existed for eons, born by one of the divinities of this realm in its beginning, an offspring of the Mergens. Chaos essence integration complete. You can use Chaos essence. A secondary essence pool has been created. Soul absorption. 75%. Echo formation. Success. Name. Cryos. Origin of madness. Classification. Origin rank Echo. Abilities. All original powers retained plus Chaos authority, contained. Loyalty. Unknown. The white light exploded outward, then collapsed back into a single point before expanding once more, this time taking shape. A figure materialized where the essence had been. Cryos stood there, different. His form was identical to what it had been in life. The same build, the same features, but his presence had fundamentally changed. His hollow eyes now swirled with patterns of pure chaos, gold and purple and impossible colors that shifted moment to moment. Cryos. The eyes didn't blink. He just stood there, staring at Northern. A small frown creased Northern's face. Aoi. Special notes. First origin rank Echo in recorded history. Chaos integration unstable. Cannot be summoned in external reality. The Echo Cryos is entering enforced hibernation. Northern's confusion flickered. What? Why is it like that? Due to the large difference between soul ranks, the Echo Cryos is clashing with your soul. If this continues, it will cause a fractured soul and may slowly kill you. Thus Echo Cryos was forced into hibernation until your soul has grown. Northern sucked his teeth painfully. Damn. I'm tired of being limited. Just when I thought I was powerful. You are powerful. Your standards, they just happen to be quite high. Northern sighed and shook his head. You can't blame me. As a nomad, I was taught how to kill a monster by a monster, and I ended up killing that monster and his master. To think that simple issue would escalate into all of this. Somehow I feel targeted. Northern frowned slightly, thinking back on the memories. He tilted his head. Aoi, what do you think about fate? Do you believe in it? Invalid request. Command not recognized. How convenient for you. He exhaled. Aoi, what happened to all the monsters? People, everyone I've ever killed? The memory of chaos remembers all. The memory of formless also remembers all. Northern smiled. Soul numbers are being recorded at the moment. In the meantime, Northern's eyes flared. Yeah, I'm needed outside. The land Northern came to was vastly different from what he'd left behind amidst the explosion, and he had to admit the new development shocked him. Mildly but undeniably. The moment he arrived, he confirmed the heat signatures of his people. Raven and Thalen had somehow survived. Jeskai and Linus were protected by Revant. Amel. It'll certainly take me a while to get used to calling him that. Lastly was Ul. The space prism he'd constructed for her still stood. The explosion might have been cataclysmic, but the space prism was also a revised edition of an Origins authority. He looked up and saw Kal and the Chaos Prince were still there. And Byran had protected what remained of Luingard by simply cutting through the impact. After confirming all of that, Northern's gaze twisted toward the Chaos Prince with fury. He stared down at Northern, a wild smile frozen on his face. Wow, who would have thought you'd go right ahead and steal my kill? You thieving snake. Green snake under the green grass you are. I trusted you, damn it. Northern's blue eyes blazed. I was wrong. Apparently, you're the real madness. Your father over here is a learner compared to you. The Chaos Prince's gaze darkened, his smile turning cold. Now you're just being unfair. First you break my trust in you, then you steal my kill. Not to mention the fact that the person you just killed is my father, Northern. You killed my father. Northern gritted his teeth. This son of a bitch. The Chaos Prince's smile twisted into something darker, more feral. His form began to ripple as void energy leaked from his pores like black smoke. You know, Northern, I was just thinking. After all of this is over, I'd go ahead and tell you the truth beneath the lies. His face contorted. But you just had to go and do this, didn't you? Stealing is very bad. Northern. Very bad. Especially when that friend trusted you with their life. The space around him warped, reality bending like melted glass. Northern's eyes narrowed, blue light emanating from them as he glared at the Chaos Prince. Layer 1. Third eye has been activated. Through the supernatural lens, Northern could see it. The Chaos Prince's soul was being devoured from within. The void wasn't just power he wielded. It was consuming him, rewriting his existence one molecule at a time. His soul structure looked like a star going supernova in slow motion. This fool, Northern stated flatly. You're killing yourself. Chaos Prince laughed wildly. Is that how it looks to you? Don't worry, the night is always darkest just before the morning. This is how my amazing body processes things. The return of Mother to the embrace of my soul is still shocking to the essence that defines my meaning. So, let's just say I'm processing. But that doesn't stop me at all. He shot at Northern with blistering speed, then thrust both hands forward. The void answered. Reality itself began to unravel in a spreading circle, existence simply ceasing to be. The ground didn't explode or disintegrate. It simply stopped existing, leaving behind nothing. Not even emptiness. Just nothing. Northern frowned, obviously bothered by the Chaos Prince drawing out such a terrifying amount of void and wielding it meaningfully, even though it was rewriting him from within. Wind Embrace has been activated. The wind caught Northern instantly, yanking him backward as the sphere of non-existence expanded where he'd been standing. The air currents screamed in his ears as they carried him away from the spreading void. Call! The Chaos Prince's voice rang out. Keep the others busy. This one is mine. The tyranny of reflection moved like liquid darkness, his form splitting into dozens of mirror images that scattered across the battlefield. Each one wore a different expression of madness. Some grinning, others weeping, a few completely blank. Northern's gaze flicked to where his companions were. He couldn't let Call reach them. True Clone has been activated. One clone leaped out of Northern, then another and another and another. Many clones started pouring out of him, scattering in every direction. Northern raised a corner of his lips toward the Chaos Prince, who froze in shock, staring at him. He snarled angrily. Do you think so little of me that you think you can spare more halves of yourself? Northern's smile was small, insidious, but it seemed to rattle Anki greatly. The Chaos Prince definitely hadn't expected such a calm expression. After he thought he'd robbed Northern of everything, Northern should be weak. So why was he smiling? What wasn't he accounting for? His eyes suddenly went cold with intense malice and seriousness. You're boring, Northern. I don't like you anymore. Northern's annoying smile remained. I never liked you, to be honest. I'm glad to realize I was right. Chaos Prince clapped his hands together, and the void erupted from his palms in twin streams of annihilation. The beams carved through Northern's clones like they were made of paper, erasing them from existence without even the courtesy of leaving corpses behind. Eclipse Step has been activated. Northern vanished into the shadow cast by a falling piece of rubble, reappearing 50 meters away. But the Chaos Prince was faster, or perhaps he simply knew where Northern would emerge. A fist wreathed in void energy was already swinging toward Northern's face. Reversal has been activated. The kinetic force reversed mid-strike, slamming back into the Chaos Prince and hurling him backward. He stopped himself after being thrown about 30 meters away, then spat blood to the side and glared at Northern with cold, examining eyes. I made sure to minimally expend myself while fighting Father. He, on the other hand, how is he even standing? Why does his blow still hurt this much? Northern's expression remained cold. He raised one hand, and the temperature plummeted. Absolute Zero has been activated. The air itself froze. Moisture crystallized instantly into intricate patterns of ice. The ground became brittle and white. Even sound seemed to slow, creating an eerie, muffled atmosphere. The Chaos Prince found his movements sluggish, his limbs heavy. Oh, that's annoying. But the void began to pulse around him, creating pockets of warmth where reality itself bent to accommodate his existence. The ice cracked and shattered in those spaces. You'll have to do better than that. Lightning Chains has been activated. Lightning erupted from Northern's fingertips. A brilliant arc of electrical fury that struck the Chaos Prince in the chest. But it didn't stop there. The bolt jumped to the nearest reflective surface, one of Kaal's mirror duplicates, then to one of Northern's clones, then back to the Chaos Prince, building in intensity with each jump. The Chaos Prince froze mid-strike, his entire being rattled to an electrifying core, forcing out a maddening scream. However, what started as a scream only descended into cold, irritating laughter. He thrust both arms skyward, and the void responded like a living thing. A massive sphere of non-existence formed above them, growing larger with each passing second. With eyes wild and voice bellowing like with the force of the storm, he yelled, "If I can't kill you cleanly, I'll just erase everything." The sphere of non-existence expanded above them like a malignant sun, swallowing light itself. The Chaos Prince's laughter echoed across the wasteland, wild and unhinged. Northern's eyes narrowed, blue light intensifying. Layer 3, Causality Fracture, has been activated. Time seemed to fragment. Northern saw 3 possible futures simultaneously. Path 1. The sphere drops, erasing everything within a kilometer radius. Path 2. He dodges, but his companions are consumed. Path 3. He counters now before the sphere reaches critical mass. Northern chose the third path. One strike has been activated. Every ounce of power in his body condensed into a single point. Lightning crackled along his arm. Frost formed crystalline patterns on his skin, and the air around his fist warped from sheer concentrated force. He punched upward. The impact shattered the sphere of non-existence before it could fully form, the resulting shockwave creating a crater beneath their feet. The Chaos Prince stumbled backward, genuine surprise flashing across his face. Impressive. But Phantom Strike has been activated. Echo has been activated. Northern's fist didn't just strike once. The attack echoed, landing twice in the exact same spot with 0 delay between impacts. The Chaos Prince's attempt to phase through the first blow left him perfectly positioned for the second. The strike connected with his sternum with a sickening crack. Gah! The Chaos Prince was launched backward, skidding across the desert floor. But even as he slid, void essence pulsed from his body, and the broken bones began to snap back into place. He scrunched his face at Northern and spat out blood again. "You're stronger than I calculated. Father must have really tired you out. Yet here you are, hitting like a meteor." Northern didn't respond. He simply advanced, his movements deliberate and terrifying in their efficiency. The Chaos Prince's smile returned, though it was strained now. "Fine. Let's see how you handle this." His form blurred, and suddenly there were dozens of him, no hundreds, each one wielding void essence, each one real in some fundamental sense. Mirage has been activated, but Northern countered instantly. His own strike created 7 visual copies, each one indistinguishable from the real attack. The Chaos Prince's duplicates shattered like glass as Northern's blade-like strikes carved through them. The Chaos Prince snarled. "Those are illusions. Are they?" Refraction has been activated. Northern's next punch bent through space. He struck from the front, but the attack landed from behind, catching the Chaos Prince in the kidney. The prince gasped, void essence flickering around him protectively. "You!" Light Strike has been activated. Northern moved at the speed of light. The Chaos Prince saw him begin the motion, but by the time his brain processed the image, Northern's fist was already embedded in his jaw. The sound came after, a thunderous crack that echoed across the desert. The Chaos Prince's head snapped to the side, saliva and blood spraying in an arc. His body ragdolled through the air, tumbling end over end until he crashed into a stone outcropping 300 meters away. The stone exploded into dust. For a moment there was silence. Then the Chaos Prince emerged from the debris, his jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. He reached up with both hands and, with a grotesque wet pop, forced it back into place. Okay. His voice was slightly slurred as he spoke and walked towards Northern, glaring. Okay. I see how it is. The void essence around him intensified, turning from smoky wisps into roaring torrents. His eyes went completely black, no whites remaining. You want to play rough? Let's play rough. He vanished. Not with speed. He simply ceased to exist in one location and appeared in another, directly in front of Northern. His fist, wrapped in layers of condensed void, shot toward Northern's face. Reversal has been activated. The kinetic energy reversed, but this time the Chaos Prince was ready. He let the reversal happen, used the momentum to spin into a devastating roundhouse kick aimed at Northern's temple. The kick connected. Northern's head barely moved. The Chaos Prince's eyes widened in shock as his shin bone fractured against Northern's skull, which felt less like flesh and more like striking a mountain. What? Full impact has been activated. Recoil has been activated. Northern's counterpunch carried not just his own strength, but the kinetic energy of the Chaos Prince's kick, returned with interest. His fist drove into the prince's chest, and the sound was like a hammer striking an anvil. The Chaos Prince's ribcage shattered. Multiple bones broke simultaneously, fragments driven inward. He coughed blood, genuine pain flashing across his face for the first time. He whizzed slightly in pain. The pain of being rewritten by void should override any, "Why does it hurt this much?" Riposte has been activated. Northern's follow-up strike was even harder, the counterattack damage stacking exponentially. This time he aimed for the prince's shoulder, and the entire joint dislocated with a wet crunch. The Chaos Prince screamed. It wasn't the theatrical scream from before. This was raw, primal agony. "You bastard!" Void essence erupted from him in a desperate explosion, forcing Northern back. The prince's arm hung uselessly, but void tendrils wrapped around it, puppeting it back into position. The bones ground against each other audibly as they were forced to heal. Chaos Prince gasped. "You don't understand. I need this body. I need to be whole when Mother fully integrates. If you break me too much..." Northern's voice came coldly. "Then you shouldn't have annoyed me." Ruinous momentum has been activated. Northern struck again, and again. Each hit harder than the last, momentum building infinitely. The first punch broke 2 ribs. The second broke 4. The third shattered the Chaos Prince's forearm when he tried to block. "Stop!" 7th fragments has been activated. This was the 7th consecutive strike. It ignored all defenses, striking directly at the Chaos Prince's core, his soul itself. The prince's eyes went wide as something fundamental inside him cracked. No. No, no, no. Phase strike has been activated. Northern's fist phased through the Chaos Prince's desperate void barrier and struck his sternum again, the same spot he'd hit earlier. The already damaged bone shattered completely this time, fragments embedding in his lungs. The Chaos Prince collapsed to his knees, blood pouring from his mouth. But his eyes were still burning with that manic intensity. "You think this is over?" He laughed, blood bubbling between his teeth. "I fought things that would make you weep, Northern. This is nothing." And then he moved. The Chaos Prince's body twisted in a way that defied anatomy. His broken ribs shifted. His shattered bones realigned just enough, and he flowed like water around Northern's next strike. His eyes narrowed as he backpedaled, void essence swirling around his feet to propel him across the sand. Northern didn't give him space. He pressed his advantage immediately, his expression unchanging. The Chaos Prince's hands moved in complex patterns, weaving void essence like thread. Symbols formed in the air, ancient sorcerous signs that predated the shattering itself. Northern flinched, struck by a sudden premonition. Of course, he knew this wasn't premonition at all. His intuition was prophecy. The void essence condensed into 7 rotating rings around the Chaos Prince's body. Each ring hummed with a different frequency, and as they spun faster, reality began to distort. 7th circle binding, empty throne. The rings expanded outward, and suddenly Northern found himself standing in what appeared to be a throne room. Something that almost resembled the Void Palace. Obsidian pillars stretched into darkness above. The ground beneath his feet was polished void stone that reflected nothing. The Chaos Prince's voice resounded from every corner. "Ring a bell." He clicked his tongue pitifully. "I may not have a body fit to assimilate the void like yours, Northern, but I've been researching this thing for 10,000 years. I have more uses for the void than you ever will." Northern narrowed his eyes, blue light emanating from them. Layer 1. Third eye has been activated. Of course. This was nothing compared to the real Void Palace. It was an illusion woven with void essence, masterfully crafted, anchored to reality through sorcerous geometry, but still fundamentally false. The Chaos Prince couldn't afford the expenditure it would take to craft the real limitless void. Right now, he was too weak to even dare. Absolute lock has been activated. Northern locked the void essence in place, freezing the construct mid-formation. The throne room flickered, then shattered like glass. The Chaos Prince stood 50 meters away, genuine irritation crossing his face. "You nullified 7th circle sorcery with a thought. What kind of monster are you? Were you hiding your abilities all along to deceive me?" He didn't wait for an answer. His hands blurred through another series of signs. Faster this time. 9 blade-like projections of pure void essence materialized around Northern, each one positioned at a precise angle. They struck simultaneously from different vectors, above, below, left, right, diagonals, all aimed at joints and vital points. The Chaos Prince laughed wildly in absolute confidence that he'd trapped Northern. "I've lived 11,000 years, Northern. 11,000. What do you think you are? You're not even 18, damn it. This is just one of the 100 martial disciplines I've mastered." Wind compass has been activated. Northern sensed the air displacement from each blade before they struck. The wind told him their exact trajectories. Eclipse step has been activated. He melted into his own shadow and reappeared outside the attack radius. The 9 void blades converged on empty space, passing through each other harmlessly. The Chaos Prince's eyes widened slightly. "You're reading my attacks through air currents? That's actually brilliant." He switched tactics immediately. If air displacement was the tell, he'd eliminate the air. The void essence around him pulsed, and suddenly a sphere of absolute vacuum formed. 10 meters in diameter, with Northern at the edge. No air, no sound, no medium for wind compass to read. And from within that vacuum, the Chaos Prince attacked. His body blurred, and he closed the distance in a fraction of a second, his knee driving toward Northern's liver with surgical precision. The blow connected. Northern's body absorbed the impact, barely registering the damage. But the Chaos Prince was already moving, flowing into the next strike of his combination. Elbow to the throat, palm strike to the solar plexus, heel kick to the temple. Each strike hit with technical perfection, targeting pressure points and vital areas. But Northern's body was too dense, too heavy. Each impact left only shallow scratches, bruises that healed almost instantly. The Chaos Prince leaped back, breathing harder now. His ribs were still broken. Northern could see void essence holding them together like scaffolding. A small smile played across Northern's face. "What's wrong, pal? You look like you're having trouble landing a serious hit." The Chaos Prince, with a strained expression, looked down at his hands, then at Northern. His eyes were calculating something. Northern laughed. "Ha, you're working really hard. I just might let you land a few hits." The Chaos Prince slammed both palms into the ground, and void essence erupted downward. It spread through the desert floor like roots, going deeper and deeper until the ground beneath Northern's feet simply ceased to exist. Not an explosion, not a collapse. The matter was erased, creating a perfectly spherical void 100 meters deep. Northern dropped into darkness. But before he could react, the Chaos Prince was already executing the next phase. Void essence materialized as chains, hundreds of them, all manifesting from the walls of the sphere, all converging on Northern as he fell. The chains wrapped around Northern's limbs, his torso, his neck. Each one was reinforced with sorcerous formulas, designed to restrict movement rather than inflict damage. The Chaos Prince appeared at the edge of the void sphere, looking down. 17,000 years ago, I learned this technique from a tyrant called the Chain Emperor. It doesn't hurt you. It just makes sure you can't move while I do this. He raised both hands above his head, and void essence began to gather. But this time it was different. This time he was weaving it through precise mathematical patterns, creating geometric shapes that hurt to look at. Catastrophe theorem, void collapse array. The shapes multiplied, forming a complex three-dimensional mandala above the sphere. Each line, each angle calculated to create maximum destruction when activated. Northern hung suspended by chains in the darkness below, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like the Chaos Prince had finally found a winning strategy. The prince's smile was triumphant. "You're strong, Northern. Stronger than anyone I've fought except Father, of course, the Origins too. You fairly deserve to stay in the top 10 rankings. But you can't beat my years of accumulated knowledge." His hands moved to trigger the array. That's when Northern opened his eyes. Soul Thread has been activated. Invisible threads erupted from Northern's body, spreading through the void sphere in an instant. They attached to the chains, to the walls, to the geometric array above, to the Chaos Prince himself. Thread severance has been activated. Every chain snapped simultaneously. But more than that, Northern severed the sorcerous connections binding the catastrophe theorem together. The complex array unraveled, its mathematical precision destroyed by cutting the threads of cause and effect that held it stable. The Chaos Prince's eyes went wide with genuine shock. "You can manipulate soul threads? But that's... Gossamer Domain has been activated." The entire sphere became Northern's territory. Every surface within 100 meters was now connected to him through invisible soul threads. He could sense everything, manipulate everything, control everything within that space, including the Chaos Prince's position. Fate's Needle has been activated. An invisible thread pierced the prince's soul before he could react. His body went rigid as Northern's will imposed itself through the connection. The prince tried to move, tried to teleport, tried to explode void essence, but his body wouldn't respond. The thread made him a puppet, and Northern was pulling the strings. Northern pulled himself up out of the sphere using the soul threads like spider silk, emerging to stand on solid ground. The Chaos Prince floated beside him, held immobile by the thread through his soul. "Let me explain something." Northern spoke quietly. "You've had 20,000 years to learn techniques, to master spell arts, to refine your skills." He walked around the frozen prince, examining him like a specimen. "But I have talents you can't replicate through practice. Abilities that don't care about your experience or your knowledge." Binding Weave has been activated. More soul threads erupted, wrapping the Chaos Prince in an intricate pattern. The more he would struggle, the tighter they would constrict. The prince's voice came out strained, forced through gritted teeth. "You think this will hold me?" Void essence began to pulse from his body, trying to corrode the soul threads. And it was working slowly, but working. The threads began to fray where the void touched them. Northern acknowledged. "Clever indeed, but not clever enough." Return has been activated. Every bit of damage the void essence did to Northern soul threads would be inflicted back on the Chaos Prince after 5 seconds. The prince would literally hurt himself trying to break free. The Chaos Prince's eyes blazed with fury and, was that respect? You're adapting to everything I throw at you. Blood ran from his mouth as his own void corrosion began to damage him. Every technique, every strategy. It's like fighting someone who has the perfect counter prepared in advance. He coughed, more blood spattering. Fine. Fine. You want to see what I'm really capable of? What 20,000 years of desperation taught me. The void essence around him intensified to a level that made reality scream. His body began to blur, becoming indistinct. You know, Northern, I have been fighting, running, dying, and coming back alive for a while now. The firsts, they were really bent on killing me. I'm sure you'd have seen it in my beautiful tower you had parked at the sea harbor. You seem to have gotten by eye, but my eye is not the only one that exists. Asides from all 12 plagues Northern, I have 13 vestige scattered across your world. Did my vestige make you a prodigy, it fifth strongest? And it is the only one I've been able to get back. So boy, do not pride yourself in overpowering me. I will be back, and when I'm back, I certainly will destroy you, as a gift. He grinned hard, and the next thing his form split. Not clones, not illusions, actual quantum superposition. The Chaos Prince now existed in 17 different states simultaneously. Each one real, each one able to act independently. Void recursion, branching catastrophe. 17 different versions of the Chaos Prince moved at once, each one using a different combat style, each one attacking from a different angle, each one reinforced with sorcery that bent the laws of physics. One used the Celestial Fist technique, each strike carrying the weight of a collapsing star. Another channeled flowing shadow palm, his movements too fluid to track. A third employed the Titan breaking method, his blows designed to shatter even the most durable defenses through pure vibrational resonance. 3 more wove sorcery while the others attacked, void lances, reality tears, existence erasure beams. The remaining 11 fought with weapons manifested from void essence. Swords, spears, chains, axes, each one wielded with master-level technique. They converged on Northern from all directions at once. And Northern smiled. It was a small smile, cold, almost pitying. One's true self has been activated. True clone has been activated. Perfect copies of Northern erupted from his body. But these weren't just duplicates, they were him. Each one shared his memories, his abilities, his will. And unlike the Chaos Prince's quantum states, Northern's clones could coordinate perfectly because they were the same consciousness. The 17 Chaos Princes crashed into 17 Northerns, and the desert exploded into chaos. One Northern faced the Celestial Fist version. The prince's punch carried star-collapsing weight. But reversal has been activated. The weight reversed, crushing the Chaos Prince's own fist. Another Northern intercepted the flowing Chaos Palm version. The movements were too fluid, at the same time too chaotic to track with normal eyes, but Layer 2. Flow perception has been activated. Northern could see the momentum, the energy flow of the chaos itself. And he had to admit that the Chaos Prince's manner of wielding chaos was nothing short of astonishing. He was awed by it. The man weaved chaos like a body, his body, he flowed with it and was in perfect fluidity with its state. It took a while for this version of Northern to adjust because even though he could read each movement before it completed, countering with perfect timing was another issue. The Chaos Prince was either too fast, or took account of his predictive eyes and went too slow, instead setting traps for him. But Northern adapted in 10 moves, and the Chaos Prince was finding it difficult to land hits. A third Northern caught the Titan breaking technique head-on. The vibrational resonance was designed to shatter anything, but Northern's body was too dense, too fundamentally solid. The vibrations dispersed harmlessly. Full impact has been activated, and then Northern returned the impact with all its accumulated force, shattering that version's sternum. The sorcery-wielding Chaos Princes launched their attacks, void lances, reality tears, existence erasure beams. Absolute lock has been activated. You cannot lock a powerful concept. But channel pathways can be locked. Just do it. Mid-fight, this version of the Chaos Prince suddenly found it difficult to fill his attacks with void essence and strengthen his body. Redirection has been activated. He sent the attacks back at their casters. 3 Chaos Princes were forced to dodge their own sorcery. The weapon-wielding versions swarmed from all sides, their techniques flawless. Sword strikes that could cut space. Spear thrusts that ignored distance. Chain techniques that bound space itself. But Northern and his clones moved with terrible efficiency. Phantom Strike has been activated. Refraction has been activated. Light Strike has been activated. Each Northern became a whirlwind of counters. Attacks came from impossible angles, struck at light speed, phased through defenses. The Chaos Prince with the Void Sword found his blade caught mid-swing, then watched in horror as Northern's counterstrike shattered his jaw. The spear wielder's thrust was redirected, his own weapon driven through his shoulder. The Chainmaster's bindings were severed by invisible soul threads before they could constrict. One by one, the 17 Chaos Princes were being dismantled. The original, if there even was an original anymore, watched with growing desperation as his quantum states collapsed under Northern's assault. His voice trembled as he saw another version of himself fall. How? How are you countering everything? Northern's voice came from all of his clones at once, creating an eerie stereo effect. Oh, come on, don't look so dismayed. We're just getting started. As Northern spoke, the Chaos Prince stood frozen in dread. All around him, each one of Northern's clones was tearing him apart, and a single Northern was advancing toward him like an inevitability. He clenched his fist. His deranged expression from earlier had vanished. He looked at Northern, and a mixture of horror and hatred contorted his features. What had gone wrong? What had he not accounted for? What exactly was he missing? Why was Northern so strong and so impossible to kill? Did I get outsmarted? By a child? One who hasn't even lived 1,000 years. This was something he had been preparing for. Letting his father kill him, shattering himself into fragments. Missing close to 10,000 years of civilization's development, all for this. To have this moment. First, he'd only managed to recover half of his soul. He didn't know what had happened, but he couldn't sense it anywhere anymore. But that was no issue. If Cryos had died and Northern had found a way to cut the flow, it was fine. He'd gotten Void, which was more than compensation, even though this was only half of what Void truly was. But he knew where the other half was. And he also had the Plague Kings. He couldn't feel the presence of 2, but 10 was more than enough, and his remaining 12 vestiges had each found purchase in one host or another and would have grown it. By the time he assembled it all, mainly with the other half of the Void, he would surpass his prime. His plan was perfect. He had even successfully created a weapon that could kill the Origins, and all of this was to test it beyond their watch. Although that hadn't gone smoothly because Ul was somewhere around. But the weapon had been created. Ul being there was, in fact, a blessing, a way to send a message to the Origins and tell them to come for him. But the problem was Northern. The more Chaos Prince studied him, the more he realized the chances of leaving here alive were growing quite slim. And truth be told, he was starting to get anxious. A human, a child, is making me anxious? He twisted between rage at himself and disbelief at his situation. He internalized his failure and called himself pathetic. Northern stopped in front of him and raised his chin with a slight chuckle. I recognized that look. The corner of his lips spread fully to reveal a savoring smile. Don't beat yourself up. The biggest flaw in your plan was me finding your vestige. From that moment on, Anki, it was never going to go your way. The Chaos Prince glared at him. How can you be so sure? You received a boost, that's all. Are they sponsoring you too? Northern's gaze fell half-lidded. It was mockingly dangerous. How can I be so sure, you ask? Because it is I, Chaos Prince. I am the demon, the flaw that is going to eat into every one of you bastards' bones like a disease. I don't care who or where they are, be it Origins, tyrants, or the gods. I will destroy them if they try to take what belongs to me. He looked down for a moment. And thank you for inspiring me. I know just how to do that. I've always wondered what it would feel like owning a nation of my own. His grin widened. I will build an entire empire, Anki. One whose only purpose is to kill you all, gods, origins, and whatever the primordials are. I will kill them all. Chaos Prince's eyes had widened by the time Northern stopped talking. They were also trembling in disbelief. He was speechless. Northern's tone lightened. Well then, shall we bring this fateful battle to an end? Northern opened his hand, a sleek blade forming in it. The illusioned hefter caught the silvery glow of the moonlight and reflected it coldly as Northern raised it into the air. The Chaos Prince did not move. He just stood there, pressing his lips together. Then he bit his lower lip so hard that blood splattered out. He ground his teeth intensely, his eyes darting around frantically. Northern paused, slightly confused. Then the Chaos Prince shot eyes burning with hatred at him. Northern had never seen anything like it. His eyes were red with pain. So much pain. His jaw was covered in blood. All the muscles of his face beneath his skin could be seen. I will take everything from you. The words, for some reason, shook Northern, and his expression darkened with cold anger. That is, if you leave this place. As Northern brought the sword down, the Chaos Prince suddenly screamed. Byron! Northern's eyes widened in shock. Hearing the name didn't deter his strike, but he slowed for a moment, and the Chaos Prince exploded into millions of skin fragments, scattering in every direction. Before Northern's sword could fall, it was blocked by a familiar face. Long white hair flowed backward, and radiant blue eyes looked at Northern with cold intensity, no emotion flashing through them at all. Everything about Byron felt the same except the look in his eyes. They lacked the reverence, the honor they usually held whenever Byron looked at him. Even in the least of situations, Byron had always looked at him with honor and reverence. To have the same Byron regard him so coldly, Northern felt something like a thick, sharp pain tear into his chest. The look in Byron's eyes was enough to tell him that his Sword King was gone. Ahoy! You will have to kill him and turn him into an echo. Is there no other way? The influence of the void is strong, particularly in this summon. All other souls have been recovered except this one. It seems the Chaos Prince had marked the strongest summon and salvaged all the rest to have absolute control over this one. Northern's gaze darkened with pain. Of course, Byron, being who he was, couldn't have fallen into control so easily. That meant the Chaos Prince had been doing this since the very beginning. He had probably tried to control all of Northern's soul summons but discovered which ones would be very difficult to dominate. And then he'd picked the strongest of them all and salvaged all the others to focus on that single one. The others were salvaged, which was probably why the rest could be recovered even through the memory of chaos. How many souls currently exist within me? 7,891. Would you like me to echonize souls and fuse them to create a supreme echo capable of fighting the Sword King? Northern thought about it for a moment. Then he answered, no. It would be a disrespect to such a great man to be slain that way. If anyone is capable of killing him, it has to be those he taught. That is his definition of death. According to the memory Northern saw, the desert sand erupted as Northern launched himself forward. The Odachi in Byron's hand came up in a blur of lightning-wrapped steel, the clash sending a shockwave that carved a crater 15 feet wide beneath them. Northern's blade vanished the instant before impact, reappeared at Byron's kidney line. The Sword King twisted, Odachi reversing grip, catching the invisible edge on his crossguard. Sparks of lightning traced the phantom sword's outline for a heartbeat before both warriors exploded apart, each taking a dozen steps across empty air. They met again above the dunes. Steel screamed against steel. Northern fainted high, his blade flickering visible in rapid succession. Byron didn't track the weapon. He tracked Northern's shoulders, his hips, reading the body that wielded the sword. The Odachi carved upward through where Northern's blade would be, lightning crackling along its edge, and caught illusioned hefter just as it phased back into reality. The force sent Northern spinning. He converted the momentum into a lateral slash that would have opened Byron's throat. The Sword King leaned back until his spine was parallel to the ground, Odachi coming around in a rising arc that forced Northern to parry with both hands. They hung there, locked blade to blade, suspended 40 feet above the desert floor. Lightning crawled down Byron's Odachi toward Northern's hands. Northern's blade vanished, reappearing behind Byron's guard, forcing the Sword King to release and spin away. They both dropped, hit sand simultaneously, and exploded forward again. The night erupted with their violence. Northern's blade traced 7 lines of silver light in a single second, each one aimed at a different vital point, each one timed to manifest precisely when it would meet flesh. Byron's Odachi became a wheel of lightning, deflecting strikes Northern hadn't even made yet, reading the rhythm of invisible steel through nothing but the whisper of displaced air and the minute shifts in Northern's stance. Their feet never stopped moving. Northern advanced in a spiral pattern, each step calculated to force Byron's guard to overextend. The Sword King gave ground in measured retreats, each backward step baiting Northern's aggression into killing zones where the Odachi waited. A thrust aimed at Byron's heart. The Sword King sidestepped, Odachi coming down to pin the invisible blade against the sand. Northern released his grip, rolled forward over Byron's lowered guard, and illusioned Hefter materialized in his hand mid-roll to slash at the Sword King's exposed back. Byron's Odachi was already there, reversed grip, blade pointed down, catching Northern's strike on the flat. The lightning discharge sent Northern tumbling across the sand. He converted the fall into a backward handspring, came up with his blade already in motion. They clashed in the air again, once, twice, 7 times in 3 seconds. Each impact sent them higher. The desert floor fell away 50 feet, 100, 200. They fought in the space between earth and cloud, their swords leaving trails of silver and electric blue against the night sky. Northern attacked from 17 different angles simultaneously, his blade phasing in and out of visibility so rapidly it created afterimages of steel that existed and didn't exist in the same moment. Byron's Odachi moved in perfect defensive spirals, each rotation precisely calibrated to intercept threats that hadn't fully materialized. But Northern was learning. Each exchange taught him the rhythm of Byron's defense. The Sword King fought in perfect circles, every movement flowing into the next without beginning or end. To break that circle, Northern needed to. He stopped attacking. The cessation was more violent than any strike. Byron's Odachi continued its defensive rotation, found nothing, and for a fraction of a heartbeat, the Sword King's guard opened. Northern was already there. Illusioned Hefter thrust invisible through the gap, aimed at Byron's throat. The Sword King twisted, Odachi coming around impossibly fast, but Northern's blade was already gone. Reappeared at waist height, cutting upward. Byron bent backward, spine arching, but Northern's follow-through brought the blade around in a reverse grip slash that should have disemboweled him. The Odachi's pommel caught illusioned Hefter just below the hilt, deflecting it by inches. Lightning erupted from the point of contact, sending Northern tumbling through the air. He spun through the discharge, landed on nothing, and pushed off empty air to attack from a new vector. They fell and rose and fell again, fighting across 3 dimensions as if gravity were merely a suggestion. The clouds above became their battlefield. They clashed within the vapor, their blades leaving cleared channels through the moisture where their strikes displaced the air itself. Northern emerged from one cloud bank, blade invisible, stance suggesting a downward cut. Byron rose from below, Odachi held in both hands above his head, prepared to meet the strike. At the last instant, Northern twisted midair, his body rotating horizontal, blade manifesting at hip level in a slash aimed at Byron's ribs. The Sword King released his Odachi with his left hand, let the blade drop to catch Northern's strike on its edge, while his now free hand shot out and grabbed Northern's sword arm at the wrist. For a moment they hung there, eye to eye, close enough to share breath. Lightning crackled along Byron's grip, burning through Northern's sleeve. Northern's blade phased invisible and out of the Sword King's trap, manifested again in his other hand already cutting toward Byron's neck. Byron released Northern and caught his falling Odachi with his free hand, bringing it up in time to parry. The clash sent them both spiraling away through the clouds, each tumbling through vapor trails of their own violence. They emerged on opposite sides of the cloud layer. The moon illuminated them from above. Two figures suspended in the night, swords held ready. Northern attacked first. He didn't move toward Byran. Instead, he pushed off the air itself, building momentum through empty space, each push creating small whirlwinds of displaced atmosphere. By the time he reached the Sword King, his speed had tripled. Illusioned Hefter came invisible, a straight thrust with Northern's full weight behind it. Byron's Odachi deflected it high. Northern's blade vanished mid-deflection, reappeared cutting low. Byran dropped into the strike, letting it pass over his lowered body, while his Odachi swept up from below. Northern twisted, avoided the counterstrike, and planted his foot on the flat of Byron's rising blade. He used it as a springboard, launching himself into a spinning slash that carved 3 separate arcs through the space where Byron's head had been. The Sword King had already ducked into a roll through empty air, his Odachi extended behind him in a one-handed grip, the blade's lightning trail serving as a barrier that Northern couldn't cross without being electrocuted. Northern crossed it anyway. Illusion Hefter phased through the lightning, materialized on the other side, and would have taken Byron's leg off at the knee if the Sword King hadn't somehow anticipated this and brought his Odachi around in a reverse grip slash that caught Northern's blade at an angle. The deflection sent Northern spinning. He used the momentum, his body rotating through 7 full rotations before his feet found purchase on a condensed platform of air that shouldn't have been able to support his weight. He pushed off immediately, blade already in motion. They clashed in the center of the cloud layer. Steel met steel 57 times in 8 seconds. Neither gave ground because there was no ground to give, only air and velocity and the perfect mathematical precision of their blades finding each other through darkness and vapor. Northern's attacks came from impossibility. His blade visible from one angle, invisible from another, existing in a state of uncertainty that should have made defense impossible. But Byran defended anyway, his Odachi moving in perfect spirals that somehow intercepted threats that weren't fully committed to reality yet. They fought downward, their clash carrying them toward the desert floor in a spiral of steel and lightning. The sand approached rapidly, first distant, then close, then immediate. They hit the ground simultaneously, their impact creating a crater that spread outward in concentric rings. Neither stopped moving. Northern rolled with the landing, came up attacking. Byran absorbed the impact through his knees, his Odachi already rising to meet Northern's invisible strike. The clash sent them bouncing across the desert like stones skipping across water, each impact with the sand creating new craters, each bounce carrying them dozens of feet before the next collision. They fought through the bounces, their blades meeting in midair between each ground strike. Northern landed first. His feet dug into sand, creating furrows as he arrested his momentum. Byran touched down 30 feet away, his Odachi held in a low guard, lightning crackling along its edge with such intensity that the sand beneath him began to fuse into glass. They stood there, both breathing hard despite their supernatural endurance. The desert around them bore the scars of their battle, craters and glass formations and cleared channels where their clash had displaced entire dunes. Northern's grip on Illusioned Hefter shifted slightly, his stance lowered by inches, his weight transferred from his back foot to his front foot. Not movement but the preparation for movement, the coiled spring before release. Byran saw it. His expression hardened, cold, focused. The Sword King's own stance shifted in response, his Odachi rising fractionally, his weight redistributing to counter whatever Northern was about to do. Neither moved. They stood there, separated by 30 feet of scarred desert, each waiting for the other to commit, each reading the microscopic tells that would reveal the coming strike. The wind died, the sand settled. Even the lightning along Byron's blade seemed to pause. Then Northern moved. Something about the entire atmosphere of the battle shifted the moment Northern moved, and he could suddenly feel it in his bones. Byran was about to get really serious with him. Whispering Gale has been activated. The wind itself became Northern's weapon. Air currents erupted around him in violent spirals, propelling him forward at speeds that carved a vacuum trail through the desert. Sand exploded outward from his launch point, and illusioned Hefter, still invisible, sliced through the displaced air with a whistle that became a scream. Byron's Odachi came up. The Sword King didn't move his feet, only his blade, meeting Northern's charge with a perfectly timed upward slash that should have bisected him from hip to shoulder. Phantom Strike. Refraction has been activated. Northern's body bent impossibly mid-charge. The trajectory of his attack twisted like light through a prism. What appeared to be a straight thrust suddenly came from Byron's left flank instead. Illusioned Hefter materialized for a heartbeat, aimed at the Sword King's stomach. Byron's Odachi was already there. He'd seen through the refraction, read the true angle through some impossible perception. Lightning erupted from the parry, but Northern had already phased his blade, letting it pass through the deflection to strike from yet another angle. Opponent has used a unique ability. Byron suddenly split into multiple defensive positions simultaneously. Northern's blade found the Sword King's guard no matter which angle it manifested from, as if Byron had already moved to counter strikes that Northern was still deciding whether to make. Echo has been activated. Northern's strike landed once, then landed again 0.5 seconds later, the echo of his attack repeating itself with identical force and precision. Byron parried the first. The second caught him in the ribs. The Sword King slid backward 3 feet, boots carving trenches through sand. There was no blood or cut. His body had somehow absorbed the impact without taking the wound. Northern was left with his mouth slightly agape. It was like his sword passed through the Sword King. He frowned a moment later and shot forward. Lightning Rod 1 strike has been activated. Northern's entire body became a capacitor. Every ounce of his power condensed into a single point. His blade, his will, his existence all compressed into one perfect attack. The air around him ionized, creating visible distortions. Illusioned Hefter blazed with accumulated force, no longer invisible but burning with condensed potential. He thrust. The opponent has responded with an overwhelming ability. Byron's Odachi didn't move to parry. It was already there, had been there, would be there, existed in all moments of the strike simultaneously. The blade intercepted Northern's thrust in the past, present, and future at once. Northern's eyes trembled. What the? The collision created a shockwave that atomized the sand within 50 feet, turning it to glass and then to powder. Northern's condensed strike shattered against Byron's blade, and the backlash sent him tumbling backward through 3 dunes. Infinite iteration has been activated. Northern's body regenerated the damage mid-tumble. Crushed ribs iterated back to undamaged versions. Torn muscles rewound to wholeness. He came out of the roll already attacking, barely slowed. Eclipse Step has been activated. Northern vanished into his own shadow and emerged from Byron's, his blade already cutting upward toward the Sword King's spine. The attack came from impossible proximity, from within Byron's guard, inside the defensive perimeter where the Odachi couldn't reach. However, it was useless. For that frozen instant, Byron became completely undetectable, existing in a dead moment outside of time itself. Northern's blade passed through empty space where the Sword King had been, and then Byron was behind him, Odachi already in motion. Reversal has been activated. The incoming strike's vector reversed mid-swing. Byron's Odachi suddenly cut toward the Sword King himself with equal force. But Byron simply let the blade continue its motion, flowing with the reversal, converting what should have been a counterattack into a spinning slash that came at Northern from a new angle entirely. Northern barely got his blade up in time. The impact drove him to one knee, sand exploding beneath the force. Full impact. Recoil has been activated. Every hit Northern had taken, every parry that had jarred his arms, every deflection that had sent him tumbling, the kinetic energy of all of it stored in his body, building like a battery charging. Now he released it all at once. His next strike carried the accumulated force of a dozen exchanges. Illusioned Hefter became a blur of concentrated violence, aimed at Byron's center mass with enough power to shatter mountains. Byron's body moved without conscious thought, positioning itself between heartbeats in the perfect counterstance. The Odachi came up at a precise angle that caught Northern's empowered strike on the flat of the blade and redirected it harmlessly skyward. Lightning discharged along the deflection path, creating a pillar of electric fury that reached the clouds. Northern spun with the deflection, already planning his next. Byron's strike landed between Northern's heartbeats. In that infinitesimal moment of vulnerability when Northern's heart was neither contracting nor expanding, his body betrayed him. Every muscle froze. His blade stopped mid-motion. His breath caught in his throat. The Odachi's lightning-wreathed edge stopped 1 inch from Northern's throat. They held there, Northern paralyzed by his own biology. Byron perfectly still with his killing blow paused at the perfect distance. The moment stretched, both warriors locked in the crystallized instant. Then Northern's heart beat again. Wind Embrace has been activated. The wind itself caught him, yanked him backward out of the blade's path even as his body remained frozen. Air currents grabbed his limbs and pulled, creating distance between him and the Sword King's edge. Northern gasped horribly, staring at the distance with a stunned and terrified gaze, sweat pouring down his face. The Odachi had completed its cut through empty space. Almost immediately, Byron flowed forward into the opening Northern had left, blade coming around in a horizontal slash that would bisect Northern at the waist. Shadow Step, Supreme Shadow has been activated. Northern's shadow surged upward like a living thing, interposing itself between his body and Byron's blade. The Odachi cut through the shadow, and the shadow screamed. It was cut. It bled darkness, but it bought Northern the fraction of a second he needed to recover. Mirage has been activated. Northern's next attack became 7 visual copies. Each one looked real, moved real, would cut real if it connected. Byron faced an avalanche of steel, each blade coming from a different angle, each one potentially the killing stroke. Byron's eyes tracked each attack for a microsecond. His blade moved in a simple figure-8 pattern, and somehow, impossibly, every single one of Northern's 7 attacks met the Odachi's edge at precisely the point where they had no momentum, no leverage, no killing potential. The Sword King had identified the flaw in the technique instantly and exploited it with surgical precision. Northern pressed harder. He had to. Staying at range meant death. Close combat was his only chance. One's true self, true clone, has been activated. 2 Northerns split from one. Both perfect copies, both wielding illusion hefter, both attacking with identical skill and intent. They came at Byron from opposite sides, their blades phasing in and out of visibility in synchronized patterns designed to create inevitable openings. Byron's single slash became dozens. Phantom afterimages of legendary cuts overlaid his own strike, each one the perfect technique of some long-dead master warrior. His Odachi existed in multiple states simultaneously, covering more angles than should have been physically possible. Both Northern clones met the phantom strikes simultaneously. Both were driven back, both bleeding from shallow cuts that appeared across their arms and shoulders. The wounds burned not just flesh, but something deeper. Both Northerns were about to stand when one of them frowned coldly and looked at his shoulders. He had grown accustomed to his new body even though it hadn't been a day. Every part of his body he could feel with impossible detail. So he noticed the slight change immediately. My wounds aren't healing? The cuts on Northerns, both Northerns' bodies weren't healing normally. Even as infinite iteration tried to repair them, they resisted, leaving marks that throbbed with phantom pain. These weren't just wounds. They were Byron's presence carved into Northern's very essence. The clones merged back into one. Too much strain to maintain both while fighting with wounds that refused to heal. Let's hope this will somehow weaken it. Oblivion's mark, Nullify, has been activated. A passive aura expanded outward, a zone of negation that weakened supernatural phenomena. The lightning crackling along Byron's Odachi dimmed slightly, its electric fury muted within Northern's influence. Byron's eyes flared, golden yellow light seeping from them, cold, calculating, as if he was already processing the new variable without hesitation. Then he shifted, adjusted his technique to account for the weakened lightning. The blade became faster instead, raw speed compensating for reduced magical potency. The Sword King didn't rely on any single advantage. They clashed again, and again, and again. Northern threw everything he had into the exchange. Wind blades, shadow tendrils, lightning-fast strikes augmented by every speed enhancement he possessed. His blade became a storm of silver impossibility, attacking from angles that defied geometry, existing in states that defied logic. Byron's Odachi met every single strike. Not through superior speed, through superior understanding. The Sword King read Northern like an open book, his glowing eyes processing every micro-expression, every shift in weight, every hint of intent before Northern himself fully committed to the action. They blazed across the desert, hurling themselves toward the ruin of the empire. Northern was shocked. He thought he could see the most with his eyes. Byron didn't have any ocular abilities, at least none that Northern knew of. His game of analysis was just insane. Impossible. He was using every movement of Northern's body to read what Northern was thinking. If Northern thought he was 2-3 steps ahead of the Sword King was at those 3 steps too, simply by reading hints across his body. But he was using superior knowledge and understanding to beat Northern at his own game. So much so that Northern had to consider the possibility of the Sword King regaining all of his memories. Byron was a powerful man who had achieved pinnacle in his youth. Perhaps that was the man Northern was fighting right now. He chuckled slightly as he fled from the Sword King's pursuit. Crap! Isn't this unfair? These guys were slaying titans in their prime. Either way, if he'd have any chance at beating the Sword King, then he himself had to be as innovative and cunning as possible. He already had the perfect repertoire. Now he just had to test the limits of his own intelligence. Soul Thread Flow has been activated. Northern layered his demon eyes over the Soul Thread perception. Then his eyes saw something beautiful, the invisible connections between cause and effect, the threads that linked Byron's intent to his actions, the causal chains that made the Sword King's defense seemingly perfect. Northern's eyes traced the golden threads weaving through the air between them, intricate patterns of causality that connected Byron's every movement to its inevitable outcome. It was dauntingly beautiful. Byron's counter-rhythm pulsed with steady frequency, each defensive motion synchronized to something fundamental. Not just his heartbeat, something deeper, the rhythm of existence itself. If I can't disrupt the connection, maybe I can redirect it. Soul Thread Binding Weave has been activated. Northern didn't try to cut the threads this time. Instead, he wove his own soul threads through Byron's causal network, parasitic connections that followed the Sword King's perfect patterns without disrupting them. He was learning the language of Byron's technique, one thread at a time. The Sword King's pursuit didn't slow. If anything, it accelerated. The Odachi came around in a diagonal slash that would have taken Northern's head off if he hadn't ducked into a forward roll. Eclipsing Dread Eclipse Step has been activated. Northern vanished into his own shadow mid-roll, emerged from a shadow 20 feet to the left. His blade was already cutting toward Byron's exposed flank, an attack the Sword King couldn't have seen coming. Byron's Odachi was already there. The golden light in his eyes intensified. He'd read something, the angle of Northern's roll, the direction of his momentum, the instinctive preference Northern had for left-side attacks. Extrapolated from microdata and met the strike before it fully manifested. He's reading my habits, my patterns. Everything I do teaches him more about how I think. The realization sent ice through Northern's veins. Every exchange was making Byron's defense stronger because the Sword King was building a complete psychological profile through combat analysis. Northern had to become unpredictable, had to fight in ways that contradicted his own instincts. Phantom Strike, 7th fragment has been activated. 6 strikes, each one deliberate, each one following Northern's natural attack patterns. Byron's Odachi deflected them with minimal effort, the Sword King's enlightened mind cataloging each movement, refining his understanding. The 7th strike came from the opposite angle Northern's body language suggested. His weight was shifting right, his blade came from the left. His shoulders indicated a high slash, the cut came low. Every physical tell was a lie. The blade ignored all defenses and struck directly at Byron's core. The Sword King's eyes widened fractionally, the first hint of any emotion Northern had seen. It made him grin proudly. But the next moment, Byran became partially intangible at the instant of contact. The blade passed through him like smoke, but not before carving a shallow line across his ribs. First blood. Barely a scratch, but blood. The golden light in Byron's eyes dimmed, then blazed twice as bright. Northern felt the shift immediately. The pressure emanating from the Sword King doubled. The air itself grew heavy, pressing down with the weight of ages. Some restraint has partially been released. Reality strained. Northern's legs buckled slightly under the sudden exhaustion that flooded his body. Not physical tiredness, but the accumulated weariness of centuries compressed into a single moment. His movements slowed, his reactions dulled, as if he'd aged 100 years in a heartbeat. Restraint? This bastard has been holding back on me all along. Infinite iteration fights against temporal exhaustion. Northern's cells iterated backward, trying to restore themselves to an undamaged, unaggravated state. But the exhaustion wasn't physical, it was existential. The weight of Byron's ancient presence crushing against Northern's relatively young soul. The Sword King closed the distance in 3 steps. Not running, just walking, but each step covered impossible ground. The space between them collapsing as if reality itself was bending to accommodate Byron's intent. Moonlit whisper, first whisper. Moon drinks shadow initiates. Northern's eyes widened in milliseconds. It's different. The Odachi never left its guard position. But somehow it was already cutting. Northern didn't see the draw, couldn't see it because it happened in the space between perception and reality. The blade existed in the sheath and in the cutting motion simultaneously. Northern's instinct screamed. He threw himself backward, blade coming up in a desperate guard. Too slow. The cut passed through his defenses, carved a line across his chest. Not deep, Byran was still teaching, still calibrating, but absolute. The wound appeared before the blade arrived, during the cut, and after it passed, existing in all states of the slash at once. Infinite iteration attempts regeneration. The wound refused to close. Byran had just unleashed a cut that existed outside of normal causality. Northern's healing ability recognized the damage but couldn't undo something that existed in multiple temporal states simultaneously. Northern staggered back, pressed his free hand against the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers, not flowing quickly, but flowing constantly, as if the cut was perpetually fresh. 2 wounds that won't heal. If this keeps up. Soul thread severance has been activated. Desperate, Northern lashed out with invisible soul threads, trying to sever the temporal connection between the wound and its various states of existence. His blade phased invisible became a conduit for the thread-cutting technique. Byron's Odachi moved in a simple horizontal slash. But the blade cut more than air, it severed the concept of Northern's technique itself. The soul threads unraveled, their connection to Northern's intent dissolved. The ability simply stopped working. Northern's eyes widened. What? He can even cut my talent ability? What the hell? Northern felt it vividly, the sudden absence where his technique had been. Not disabled. Not blocked. Simply severed from his arsenal, at least temporarily. Like having a limb go numb, but worse. The technique existed, but his access to it had been cut clean. He can cut abilities themselves? The golden-eyed Sword King advanced. Still silent, still cold. But now there was an intensity to his movements that hadn't existed before. Northern had drawn blood, and the lesson had shifted from basic instruction to advanced curriculum. Lightning rod lightning chains has been activated. Northern condensed electricity in his free hand and fired it at Byran. The bolt struck, and immediately chained to 3 different points around the Sword King, creating a cage of crackling energy that would electrocute him from multiple angles simultaneously. Byron's Odachi became a spinning wheel of steel, the blade moving so fast it created a complete defensive sphere. Each lightning chain struck the spinning blade at precisely the moment of minimal electrical charge, grounding the attack harmlessly through the metal and into the sand. The cage collapsed. Byran emerged untouched. Northern was breathing hard now. Not just from exertion, from realization. Every technique he used, Byran countered with something more fundamental. More elegant. More perfect. I can't win through power. Can't win through speed. Can't win through technique. What's left? Aoi's voice came in the moment. I have 3 suggestions. First suggestion. You can try to copy Byron's form right now. It would be incomplete analysis. The copy would be flawed, and using it could damage your soul. Second suggestion. You can burn everything. Activate every ability simultaneously in one catastrophic assault. Might force Byran to use a forbidden technique. Also might kill you in the process. Third suggestion. You stop fighting like a human warrior and start fighting like a demon. Unpredictable. Adaptive. Endless. Hell, what have I been doing all along? Fighting as though you are confined to a single form. Northern grinned despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, despite the 2 unhealable wounds marking his body. All right then, let's see what you've got. 927 souls have successfully been echinized. Advanced fusion has been activated. Echo summoning, mass deployment continues. A massive colorless rift tore open in the desert and immediately began to spill forth despicable creatures. Charred monsters that could fly, some that walked and ran towards them with insane speed. There were monsters with jagged teeth and bipedal legs, some on all 4s, some with crimson skin like blood that rushed forward. All attacked Byran with feral madness. But Northern wasn't using them to just attack. These monsters were nothing to the Sword King. He was using them as anchors. Soul synchronization links to all active echoes. Northern's consciousness fractured across 927 different perspectives. Each echo became an extension of his senses, his thoughts, his analysis. He experienced the battlefield from nearly 1,000 angles simultaneously, processing data at a rate that should have shattered his mind. But his demon nature held. His form mastery adapted. His endless essence expanded to accommodate the impossible cognitive load. Through 927 pairs of eyes, he watched as Byran carved through all the monsters with ease regardless of their rank. One hand placed behind his back and his legs moving minimally. And finally, he saw it. The pattern wasn't in Byron's movements. It was in the spaces between his movements. The Sword King's technique was so perfect it created negative space. Moments where he absolutely could not be, because his enlightened efficiency meant he never wasted motion. If Northern could force Byran into one of those negative spaces, the Sword King would have to break his perfect form to compensate. And in that break, there would be an opening. It would last maybe 1/10 of a second. But that was enough. Soul Thread, Fate's Needle, has been activated. Northern fired invisible threads from 17 different echoes, each one aimed at a different point in space. Not where Byran was, but where he couldn't be. Creating a web of impossible positions that would force the Sword King toward a specific location. Byron's golden eyes tracked each thread, even though they were invisible. His enlightened perception saw the trap forming. Golden footprints appeared beneath Byron's feet, visible only to him, showing the optimal route through Northern's web. The Sword King followed the path, each step perfect, each movement calculated to slip through the gaps in Northern's trap. But Northern had anticipated that too. Oblivion's Mark Erasure Touch has been prepared. The 17th thread wasn't meant to bind. It was marked, infected with Northern's negation ability. And as Byron's blade moved to cut it, the mark transferred to the Odachi itself. The sword's lightning flickered, weakened, not disabled, just dulled further, the accumulated effect of 2 nullify activations and now a direct mark eating at its supernatural properties. Byron's expression shifted, a slight narrowing of the eyes. Calculation. The Sword King was adapting to yet another variable. But Northern had finally created an advantage that would take more than an instant to counter. Northern didn't waste it. Full impact ruinous momentum begins accumulating. Northern attacked. Not with finesse. Not with technique. With pure, relentless aggression. Each strike built on the last, momentum compounding with every successive blow. His hybrid form allowed rapid-fire attacks from multiple angles, claws from shadow limbs, kicks enhanced by lightning speed, blade strikes protected by iron-hard defense. Byran parried, deflected, countered, but each exchange cost him more than it cost Northern. The erasure mark on his blade was spreading slowly, making each parry slightly less effective. And Northern's ruinous momentum meant each successive strike hit harder than the last. 10 strikes, 20, 30. Northern's attacks became supersonic, each impact creating shockwaves that carved new craters in the desert floor. His hybrid form was burning essence rapidly, but he pressed harder, faster, building an avalanche of violence that even Byron's perfect defense couldn't fully neutralize. 40 strikes, 50. Byron's breathing shifted. Each inhale stretched into subjective eternities. Each exhale froze the world. To Northern's Shingen-enhanced perception, he could see the Sword King literally thinking faster, his enlightened mind processing centuries of experience in the space between heartbeats. The Odachi's movements became sharper, more precise. Byran was adapting to Northern's momentum, learning the rhythm of the escalation, preparing to shatter it. 60 strikes. Northern saw the counter forming in Byron's stance. The Sword King was preparing something, a technique that would break Northern's momentum completely and end the exchange. Not yet. Just a little more. 70 strikes. Plus the main threats, hundreds of other echoes lunged into Byron's space, forcing him to tear away for a second. But before Northern's attacks could land, he was already deflecting the blade, sparks flying, only for Northern to surge back again. They went back and forth for a while until Northern finally found negative space in Byron's defense. The place where his perfect technique created a void he couldn't fill without breaking form. Byron's Odachi style was optimized for horizontal and diagonal cuts. Purely vertical attacks from directly overhead fell into a blind spot his technique couldn't efficiently cover without sacrificing the circular flow that made his defense perfect. Whispering Gale, wind manipulation launches Northern upward. An explosive gust of wind propelled Northern straight up, blasting away several echoes and breaking contact with Byran mid-exchange. The sudden disengagement went against every combat instinct, never surrender momentum, but Northern needed the positioning more than the advantage. He rocketed into the air, rising 30 feet in a heartbeat. Byran stepped onto invisible platforms, moving upward to intercept. But the technique required visible moonbeams, real or illusory, to create footholds. It was fast but not instantaneous. Northern had the height advantage for exactly 0.7 seconds. Every ability he had left, every technique that wasn't disabled or exhausted, Northern activated simultaneously. Sun's legacy solar ascension has been activated. His body became pure solar energy, blazing, radiant, burning with the fury of a miniature sun. Phantom Strike, Light Strike has been activated. His attack moved at the speed of light. Invisible, instantaneous. By the time Byran registered the movement, the strike was already complete. Phantom Strike, Phase Strike has been activated. Illusioned Hefter passed through all defenses, phasing through the physical to strike directly at the target's core. Full Impact, Riposte has been activated. Northern had blocked and dodged dozens of Byron's attacks. All that accumulated damage, every parry that had jarred his arms, every near miss that had grazed him, converted into additional power for this single strike. Lightning Rod 1 Strike has been activated. Every ounce of Northern's remaining essence condensed into one point. His existence, his will, his desperate determination, all compressed into a singular moment of violence. The blade fell like divine judgment. Byron's golden eyes widened. Byran has used single draw path. Time broke. Byron's draw occurred before Northern's strike. Retroactively, paradoxically, impossibly. The Odachi left its guard position and entered cutting motion in the past, ensuring it arrived first regardless of when Northern's attack was launched. The two techniques collided in the space directly above Byron's head. Light versus lightning. Solar fury versus temporal paradox. Northern's everything versus Byron's fundamental truth. Reality screamed, The collision created a sphere of absolute destruction. Space itself tearing under the pressure of two impossible attacks meeting in a single point. The shockwave expanded outward, atomizing sand into glass and glass into vapor. The distant ruins were being devoured at a terrifying pace. The sphere expanded with great speed, consuming the whole of the empire and separating the water in a matter of seconds. Both warriors were thrown backward by the detonation. Northern's solar form flickered, failed, and he reverted to his hybrid state mid-flight. Byran maintained his footing somehow, sliding backward across the sand but remaining upright. Northern crashed into a dune, tumbled through it, and came to rest 50 feet from the impact point. His body was screaming. Every wound, the 2 soul-scarred cuts and a dozen new ones from the collision's backblast, blazed with agony. But he was smiling, because Byron's left sleeve was torn. Just torn. Not cut. Not burned. But torn, physical evidence that Northern's ultimate attack had reached the Sword King. Had forced him to use a forbidden-level technique to counter. Had pushed him, even if only by a millimeter. Byran looked down at his torn sleeve. The golden light in his eyes flickered, dimmed, then stabilized. The Sword King's expression remained neutral for a moment. Then he sighed and suddenly erupted with laughter. Northern, who had been so proud of himself just now, stared, confused, very confused. Northern was silent, looking as though reality had suddenly become too difficult to process. One moment he was fighting a trusted subordinate whom he'd assumed was being controlled by Chaos Prince, but the next moment that same subordinate was laughing. Aoi! He was certainly being controlled. Was? Then he's free. I suspect he must have broken out of control during the battle. Northern frowned subtly. He did? And kept playing with me? Thinking about it, Northern did feel it was the kind of thing Byran would pull. The Sword King slowly walked over to him with a laid-back posture, glancing at his shoulder where Northern had torn his cloth. Ah! As expected of the one I chose to serve, you grew tenfold in a single battle. It was only a matter of time before you'd eventually take my head. He laughed with contentment and pride as he approached Northern, who was still staring at him, stunned and blinking. Northern's frown deepened, and he extended the illusioned hefter toward Byron's face. His tone was grim. What do you think you're doing right now? Byron stopped. His face dropped its jovial mask and became intense, serious. He dropped to one knee and lowered his head. You should kill me. Northern gritted his teeth inwardly, biting down the rage. That is not what I asked. What do you think you're doing? He shouted. Northern's tone rose with kindling rage. Is this a joke to you? If you broke out of his grasp, what stopped you from saying it earlier? Do you realize what precious time I just lost? Time I could be using to chase that bastard. Byran said nothing. Instead, he remained there as the weight of Northern's words pressed on him. Northern staggered back, struck by immense pain, because he'd earnestly thought Byran was being controlled the entire time. He'd even steeled himself to murder one of the people he respected and treasured. And it all turned out Byran was toying with him? The Sword King raised his head, his brows furrowed with regret. Please, my lord, look beyond my rash behavior and consider my intent. From the moment I attacked you, nothing was within my grasp. However, at some point I severed the thread controlling me. But it wasn't that simple. A while ago, a great deal of my memory came rushing into my head just before I lost connection with you. Certain truths were revealed to me from that memory, including the mistakes every single one of us made. I have a cursed destiny, one that binds me to the sword of those I teach. I'm sure you know about Prince Phanon. He wasn't the first. I've had 7 students before Phanon that I had to kill myself. When it came to Prince Phanon, I was tired of running from fate. I was sick of my cursed destiny, so I didn't want to win anymore. However, I hate to say it, I thought I was helping the prince. Instead, I merely aided in his doom and the mistake that fragmented the Echo Realm. He looked at Northern's face, a mixture of emotions in his eyes. As much as I want to blame the origin for what happened to us, each and every one of us had a decision to make, and whether directly or indirectly, That decision played a hand in the ultimate mistake that broke our perfect world. It was a decision that came from a point of greed. The origins weren't the only greedy ones. We all were. Whether our greed was justified by good intentions or self-conceit, it doesn't change the fact that our actions destroyed the world once. He gritted his teeth, suppressing painful memories, but they somehow reflected in the look on his face. I just didn't want history to repeat itself. There was no better moment than now for me to end you, or be ended by you. So, my lord, it wasn't a test. If you'd slipped, I really would have killed you. That was how strong my resolve was. Northern looked at him for a while and was continually speechless. He couldn't even find words. All he knew was that he was suddenly exhausted, his eyes heavy, his back aching like hell, and he wanted to collapse and sleep for the next month. However, he glared sternly at Byran. Then why did you stop? Byran met his gaze. Because I realized. He dropped his eyes a little lower. You've survived every one of my attacks. Somehow, even when you shouldn't have. You slipped through my sword. And maybe this is me just being hopeful, but with your last attack I realized if anyone can reach them, it has to be you. It will be a long and arduous journey. They don't fight in conventional means. Even I can't compare. Cryos was merely a child's tantrum compared to the power they wield. That's talking about the firsts. However, if there are other origins aside from them, I can only say we're asking for more than we can handle. Northern was silent for a while, then let out one heavy, relieving sigh. Then he looked up at the sky. The moon was getting farther away, and the golden lights were lining the horizon where sky met sea. Your expectations? I advise you to keep them to yourself, so they don't become disappointments. I'm not a hero, and I act purely out of selfish interest. I've been selfish from day one, and I'm still very selfish now. It's just that my selfishness has taken on a grander scale. Which is fine. With one's rise in power and status rises every other aspect of their life. He looked at Byran. We do have much to discuss about your memories and the first civilization. But please, Byran, you're a free man now. If you want to follow me purely out of expectations, I suggest you leave me and be on your own. The Sword King suddenly laughed, short and subtle. Just the response I expected from you. His face grew more serious as he looked at Northern. It doesn't matter to me where you stand. You gave me a chance to live and breathe, but more than that, you gave me a family, a home. It's difficult to leave that. Forgive my words just now. They were burdens of an old soul. But let this lowly swordsman belong to you again. Northern still tried to find Anki even after everything. He dispersed echoes and clones and searched far and wide, even into the depths of the waters while he reached back to Ull in the prism. When he returned, Terence was there, sprawled on the ground. Northern removed the prism and attended to her, healing her bones, as though someone had twisted them wickedly out of pure malice. She regained consciousness and confirmed that Ull had left her body. She was taken to a makeshift infirmary, where not just her but all the casualties of the war were being treated. A war? A battle, sorry. But the aftermath looked like that of a war. Half of Lewengard Empire's buildings had been razed to the ground like they never existed. Thousands had died from the last explosion, and the only thing that protected many more was the Emperor himself, who had cast an enormous shield to protect everyone. The entire front of his body was burnt beyond recognition, and even he was in the makeshift infirmary being attended to by people with healing-type talents. Northern stood at the top of the tower, surveying everything. From his vantage point, it was horrifying. It looked like they had fought in a war they could never win, but these people hadn't fought at all. In fact, they were busy trying to run for their lives. This was the price of weakness. Weakness was such a horrifying thing. Even when trying to be protected by strength, they were too fragile not to break from its grasp. Northern wasn't thinking from a point of superiority. He was merely internalizing the damage, and asking himself, if earnestly trying to save the world is destroying so many people, then what was strength supposed to do? How was it supposed to be wielded? Or was he just to accept the fact that there would always be unfortunate people like this? What if one of those unfortunate people happened to be someone he treasured? Take Silver, for example. She was still a baby, but she would grow and would be powerless before awakening any talent. Or even after awakening her talent, she might turn out to be weak. Is this the same fate that awaited her? Northern stared at everything wistfully. What do we mean when we speak of a better world? He exhaled and looked away for a moment. Aoi, I created a pocket dimension using the power of the void. Now that everything has been retrieved from Chaos's memory, can you access it? Correct. This pocket dimension was never taken, but instead was woven into Soul Forge by Omniform. Northern exhaled. Ah, I thought I had thousands of deaths on my head, merely because I forgot. What would you like me to do? There's a guy, green-haired. I want him here. The next moment, a portal appeared on the tower and disappeared, leaving a boy who was naked with his third leg rock hard and ready to thrust forward. Northern frowned darkly. What? Braham looked up and quickly squeezed his legs together, covering it with his hands. Spirit linen. Cover this green rat this instant. Immediately, silver sparks flew around Braham's body, and the next moment he was wearing armor that looked like molten vein. An exact copy. The armor was gleaming with sharp edges. It was almost as if the jagged metal plates were especially happy to be worn today. Northern curled a corner of his lips. It's good to see you too. I'm relieved you're all right. He spoke directly to the armor and shifted his gaze to Braham, who was standing up and looking around in confusion. What? Wait, isn't this Luengard? Northern disregarded his question. What were you doing? Wait, I don't even want to know. To think I was worried about the people in that place. You all must have been living a very good life there. Braham slowly turned his face to Northern. Well, it isn't perfect, but it's enough. We're not sure how many days have passed because there's only every day. But it's been peaceful and we're eating. What happened here though? It looks like hundreds of beasts the size of mountains were fighting. He suddenly pointed forward. There. Didn't there used to be a huge mountain over there, leading to Lotheloin? Northern gulped and said with a guilty tone, well, things happened. And why does that place look frozen? Oh good stars. What happened to this place? Northern sighed, his tone sharper this time. I said, things happened. Braham looked at him suspiciously and then looked over his shoulder. His eyes instantly widened in horror. Oh my, dead stars. What in the world happened? Northern glanced back and gave way, turning to the masses arranged on the harbor. Yeah, that's the reason you're here. Braham slowly shifted his gaze to Northern. His eyes were still wide with horror. What? Did you commit genocide? Northern looked down with a wistful expression. It wasn't intentional. His mouth fell open, and his hands quickly rose to cover it. You fell over to the dark side. Just how could you? Northern exhaled and kicked him off the tower. Shut up and go heal them all. Wind manipulation has been used. Just before Braham fell, the wind gently cradled him and dropped him on the ground. He might be a pompous noble, but even he had a human heart. With thousands of people laying across the port and every available human running from place to place while people groaned in pain, he wouldn't dare hesitate. Braham touched the ground, and Northern watched as the young pompous noble created a massive tree whose vines wrapped around people, lifting them off the ground as the tree itself rose and spread its branches, carrying thousands of cocoons, like a divine tree of creation itself. You have copied a new talent. Northern exhaled and turned, then sat on the ground, watching the sun rise on a peaceful universe, at least temporarily. His entire body ached, and he felt like he needed a great deal of sleep. But there was also a fundamental understanding that made him mutter, "This is just the beginning." The Chaos Prince was still out there. Revant had captured a reflection of Call, but his other reflections had escaped. All also went scot-free and would most likely report the whole thing to the firsts. From now on, there's barely going to be any peace. This was merely the beginning of a certain end. But for now, I'm going to sleep. Northern laid down on top of the Tower of Trammel and slowly drifted off into slumber. End of Volume 5. Descent of Chaos. From the vast blanket of the sea, A vessel drifted closer to the ocean's edge, dark smoke rolling into the morning sky. The sound of the ship rolled forth before its presence, shattering the peaceful silence of the aftermath, even stirring Niruern in his sleep. But he merely turned, drenching himself deeper in slumber. After a while, the ship reached the port and people started disembarking. Faces both known and unknown. They were greeted by the knights of Luingard who were still able to walk. Commander Shear limped on one leg, even with the assistance of a cane, and walked over to meet the people who touched the harbor. The moment he drew closer, his entire visage froze and he stood straight, disregarding the injury he bore. His face hardened, stripped of all emotion. His subordinates, who had been beside him, couldn't help but exchange confused glances, but the knight commander's sudden composure caused them to fall in line with the stern atmosphere. Before them, a tall, white-haired lady approached with long strides. There was nothing extraordinary about her presence at first glance. Hence it took more than a glance to recognize it. For weaker people, at least, power had words, even when someone was suppressing the ambience of their strength, not wanting to announce they were the strongest in the room. If you were equal to them or close to their level of strength, you would figure it out either by instinct or by experience. Most of the soldiers here were not that. Even the White Knights, prestigious and known to be terribly strong, didn't come close. However, certain people's attention was immediately drawn to the edge of the port. Raven, for example, was using her fist to break down a pillar that had survived the blast, but was needed to create a makeshift wall around the harbor's perimeter. She was about to throw another strike when she stopped and turned toward the harbor, her gaze narrowing. She started walking. On her way, she met Thalen, who also wore a stern look. "You felt it too?" Raven nodded. "It's not every day one gets to see a luminary. I hope it's not Ruffsburg." Thalen chuckled. "To be able to tell it's a luminary right away, you're splendid." Raven nodded. The two walked in silence for a while. Then her voice came, somewhat tender. "I'm sorry about your friend. I could have done better." Thalen shook his head. "You don't need to feel sorry. He was a paragon and strong. I would have been surprised if you'd actually had things your way. And it was all beyond our control." Raven looked down for a moment, clenching her fist. The memories of everything that happened with Ull were still fresh in her head. How the ugliness of a deity they all revered had played out before her eyes. They reached the harbor and Raven spotted a vermilion-haired lady with an eye patch. Her eyes widened. "Annette!" She immediately bolted forward, rushing over. She reached the port and fell into Annette's grasp, which shocked both Annette and Vita, who stood behind her. They had hugged before Raven realized how impulsive she'd been and awkwardly pulled away. Annette looked at her, grew embarrassed, turned slightly away, and laughed internally. I guess even she had no idea how much she'd missed everyone. Raven belatedly noticed her surroundings, the knights bowing, and the tall white-haired lady with alabaster skin standing, watching her with cold eyes. Annette spoke in Raven's defense. "Please, she's a student of mine, one of the survivors of the Dark Continent." The princess shifted her gaze and scanned the entire expanse of the port and beyond. She brought her eyes to the knight commander, and her voice bellowed, nearly shaking the ground. "Where's my brother? His big sister has come to end this treacherous battle." Raven responded with a flat tone. "You're late. The battle's ended." She looked at Raven, suppressing her anger, then looked away. "Can someone older and less annoying talk to me, please?" She gave the knight commander a look with a question mark attached. "Sir Shear." The knight commander lowered his head slightly and spoke with a reverent tone. "It is as she said, Your Highness. The battle has come to an end. I'm not sure of the details, but the white-haired boy, this lady, the man behind her, and 3 other notable individuals were what emerged from its ruins." The princess looked over to Thalen, who frowned slightly, having figured out her identity the moment they drew closer. With her right hand, she gestured for him to come closer. Thalen obeyed and stood beside the knight commander. "Care to explain?" Thalen exhaled softly. "It's a long story. You might want to settle in first. However, before I speak, you said something earlier. Your brother." Ray. Just as he spoke, a soft voice came from behind, making him pause and turn back. Lady Hinai trudged forward with hesitant steps. The princess looked at her and smiled. Auntie. The knights parted for Lady Hinai. She trudged forward and hugged the princess. Oh my stars. It's been so long. The princess patted Lady Hinai's back. Well over 15 years, Auntie. Lady Hinai withdrew from her. How is he? The princess wore a warm smile on her face. The emperor is as cold and distant as always. You know him. Lady Hinai looked a bit somber at the response, then quickly raised her head. What about your brothers and sisters? Ruya. She must have grown so much by now. The princess laughed lightly. Indeed she has. Her face hardened the next second. Auntie, is it all right if we step into somewhere closed? About your son. My stepbrother. I heard some things. Hinai's expression froze for a moment, then a gentle smile spread across her face. Sure. Let's go inside the tower. I'll tell you about your stepbrother. She and the princess walked toward the massive tower that stood like a bastion over the port. A man and a woman followed closely behind the princess, but not close enough to eavesdrop. Meanwhile, the knights finally breathed and muttered in shock, realizing they'd been standing before a princess of Riamgard. Annette rested her hands on her hips and sighed, watching the princess and the white-haired lady as they walked toward the tower. I'm guessing that's Northern's birth mother. Raven gave a long, stern look, making her shrug in confusion. What? You need to tell me what's going on. Everything. Annette chuckled. Of course. But first I need to see Northern. Raven glanced toward the roof and returned her eyes to Annette. You will. But it's better for us to just let him rest for now. He's had a very long day and night. Annette gave Raven an intense look of suspicion. I'm going to need you to fill me in on that. Annette, Arlem and his brother Jakim, Zeke, and several other notable individuals from South Drywall gathered. Naya wasn't present. Thalen had taken her to see her master's body. The rest embarked on an excursion after Raven began with, It's difficult to explain. Better to just show you. And so, Annette and her group ventured into craters that looked carved by titanic falls, carefully scaling downward to avoid slipping and tumbling inside. They traversed jagged landscapes, a forest razed to the ground where tree stumps still stood, though they required keen attention to spot. Details they'd have easily missed without their guide Raven explaining in a weighted voice what devastation a single human, not even her age, had wrought upon this landscape. Annette stopped Raven mid-conversation. Wait, what do you mean he trapped Ul here? Raven gazed down at the triangular markings on the ground. She and Thalen had drawn them, planning to transform this into a tourist site to drag down the Origin's reputation someday. She was mildly surprised by how swiftly Thalen's mind had conceived this, as though he'd been waiting for the opportunity. She nodded. Yes, like I said, with Ul possessing Terrence, we couldn't touch her. But Northern trapped her in a space prism. I don't know much about it, except that it was an ability Ul herself once used on him. Annette paused, scratching her cheek and chuckling in disbelief. So, what you're telling me is, Ul has been deceiving us all along. Fine, I was never religious about her, but a supposed progenitor of our world, and Northern had the power to trap her in a spacebox. Raven nodded. We also have to consider she was in Terrence's body and… Stop. Baby girl, stop. You're trying so hard to make this believable that you have no idea what you're doing. Raven paused, slightly stunned. Annette shook her head emphatically to ensure Raven understood. You don't get it, do you? Ul surpasses whatever fundamental and conventional sense of power we know. None of us have ever known a zenith to exist in this world. I don't think it's ever happened since… Ever. She gestured broadly, her tone demanding attention. So Ul presumably is the perfect representation of that. And then what? Northern traps her Ul in a spacebox she developed with her own ability. He took it, perfected it, and imprisoned her with it. He alone fought a tyrant, battled the Chaos Prince who escaped, and defeated his strongest servant who decimated that entire desert we saw. Raven nodded with a smile. You've been paying attention. Annette's head froze mid-motion, smoke practically rising from it. She stared at Raven, blinking. What? What's funny? Raven's smile faded quickly. Nothing. But your expression right now is priceless. Annette threw her head back, stared at the pale sky, and heaved a sigh. Raven offered with a gentle smile. Do you want to see the plains? He turned to Iceland's? Annette's mouth fell open, shock frozen on her face. These were easier to accept because she could see the evidence. Craters she wouldn't have imagined were formed by human-sized beings fighting, destroying a dense forest until nothing remained but flat land? What could have incinerated it? What magnitude of firepower? The more she pondered it, the heavier her head felt. Arlem stared in disbelief, questioning whether they were talking about the same person he knew. He didn't know Northern closely but had seen him several times, and honestly, all of this was believable. His only regret was not paying closer attention to befriending him back in the Dark Continent. His brother, though, looked lost, refusing to believe any of it. And, which of this was your handiwork? What did you do? Raven gave a pointed look, trying to stay alive amidst all of it. Look at this, you don't want to be caught in the crossfire. Staying alive takes monumental effort, more than you'd need to defeat a monster 3 times stronger. And really, I'd wager on that over having to navigate alternating landscapes. Annette studied her for a moment and scoffed. You must have been terrified. Raven wasn't one to display emotions this vividly. She never had been. Yet here she was, horrified and explaining everything with enthusiasm, as if excited simultaneously. Excited that Northern is strong. Stronger than she ever expected. She looks relieved too. Annette looked down and exhaled wearily. Noting her expression, Raven asked with concern. What's wrong? She hesitated, as if battling herself. The headmaster is dead. We saw him on our way here. She scoffed. He was like a monolith, with splendor. He seemed to have died a hero. I'm at least happy about that. It's what he always wanted. Raven looked down slightly. Everyone fell silent, the atmosphere dampening. Then Annette exhaled forcefully. Ah, but we saved our world. Northern saved our continent. And though it's just the beginning, I see hope now. So much hope. And with it shall come new developments, threats, and variables we cannot predict. Her face grew stern as she turned to see Thalen and Elitis approaching. Annette nodded in agreement. You're right, Lord Thalen. The world is bound to change, and that change will undoubtedly gravitate toward Northern. She scratched her head, muttering, Damn it. Just yesterday, I had a gutsy 15-year-old boy wanting to take the examination evaluation test. Now he's deciding the flow of an entire continent. Thalen laughed shortly, then looked evenly at everyone. If it's all right with you all, I'd like us to discuss the details of the way forward. Annette observed him mildly. At that moment, Byron and Revant approached as well, with Revant jerking his arm away from Byron's grip. It seemed the Sword King had dragged him here against his wishes, though he didn't seem particularly angry about it. Annette didn't need introductions to know who they were, and those who didn't dare ask. Their presence alone was suffocating to stand beneath. Byron looked at them with a disarming smile. I summoned Lord Thalen here to meet my master's friends and to help us. Annette watched the Sword King intently. So did Raven and the others. My master has expressed the desire to create a nation of his own. We're here today because we are the mechanisms that will bring that desire to life. Jessi, Linus, Raven, Annette, Thalen, Vita, Arlem, Helena, Byron, Revant, Braham, Howe, and Elitis all found themselves on the upper floor of the tower, a round-table meeting room. Each sat at different sections of the table, waiting, watching each other. Byron had summoned them for what he called a pioneers' meeting. He swept his gaze across them all and demanded that anyone with ties to Northern follow him. Arlem had hesitated, but Annette insisted he come along. After a long silence, Annette finally exhaled and pointed to a green-haired bastard sitting on the opposite side of the table. I understand every other person here, one way or another. But that gutter boy, that wretched existence sitting over there. For the past 9 minutes, I've been trying to figure out what the hell he's doing here. Byron, sitting next to her, glanced over at Braham. A disarming smile plastered on his face. How stood before Byron could speak. We need him. If we want to build a nation, we need his resources, his experience, and his reputation. Annette lowered her head and dragged a hand down her face in disappointment. Seriously? Aren't we past that stage by now? Have we forgotten that this boy has committed offenses that can never be forgiven, in any practical sense of the word? Braham frowned. So has Raven. And you aren't pointing fingers. Annette forced up a corner of her lips, suppressing her anger. She was about to snap back at Braham, but Raven stopped her and leaned forward on the round table. Indeed, the things I did were cruel and can never be forgiven. No amount of explanation can refute that. In fact, I don't hope to be forgiven. I made my choice, and I chose the people who stood with me, who protected me. For me, that is my moral compass, what I should do. If I had to do it again to protect my friends, I have no regrets. Besides, it might not be enough, but at least I was remorseful enough to want to pay for my crimes. She glared at him. You, however, betrayed your friends. For what? Greed? A way home? Status? Power? Help me understand how we suffered because of you. Braham's face was even, his green eyes sharp and serious. And I healed your injured ones. I was a big reason why not so many people died on that ship. Didn't Annette herself tell you this? I don't know what your definition of paying for sins is, but let's be frank here. My payment far outweighed yours. Let's say I had a hand in the destruction of Lothellowen, which was bound to happen anyway, and many died because of it, which would have still happened anyway. Do you know how many more lived because of me? The ship might have made it to the borders with barely 20 people if not for me. And how did you repay your sins? You rotted in prison for a while and hunted monsters while growing stronger. He waved her away with irritation. Girl, spare me the hate. The atmosphere went silent after Braham's speech. Raven frowned, displeased. The only reason you cared enough to get on that ship is because you had no other way out. He tilted his head. Selfish? I suppose that's difficult for someone like you to understand, because you jeopardized yourself to save hundreds so we could all go back home. You were the saint of humanity, who sought no gain. He leaned forward and slapped the table. Cut the bullshit, Raven. We both know that at its root, it's all part of a selfish agenda for self-satisfaction, to be able to live, to breathe easier with yourself, whether in suffering or peace. Why should we be called selfish when we act the same way? He pointed an accusing finger at her. You are the most hypocritical of all, the best liar. Not only do you lie to us all, but you also lie to yourself. I've never liked you since our days in Lothellowen. I have my selfish reasons for hating you, but more than that, I detest people who act indifferent to their privileges, as if they're above the law. You know what? I might as well leave this meeting right now because a rotten human like you is in it. Excuse me. He shifted his chair and stood. Sit down, gentlemen. Byron's gentle yet threatening tone halted his steps. Braham gulped and returned to his chair. The Sword King smiled. It's for reasons like this that this silence exists, so it can all spill out. He breathed in and out, as if practicing meditation. You don't have to hold it in. Just let it all out. Let the silence sink into your hearts and speak to you. If you still harbor malice that could hinder each other, it could cause grave injuries in the future. And when that happens, it'll be more than one person's responsibility to bear. He glanced over at Revant. The Lord of Despair certainly despises shouldering the burden of other people's failures. Revant shot him a hostile look. Thalen chuckled, then sighed. I guess I should speak, then. His body glowed and slowly began to shift into someone else. They saw light green hair cascading down his shoulders, long pointed ears, sharp golden eyes, and pale skin. Arlem's mouth fell open. I only see them in books. I'm an elf in our native tongue called Elvira. I and a few others are the last of our race. We sought refuge in this world a couple centuries ago when a particular tyrant married our king and sought to resurrect one who should never be brought back. There's little I can say, but a time may come in the future where I'll need help from." He hesitated. "Friends. I hope it won't be too much to ask. And Rian knows all about this." They all looked at him in silence, nodding in understanding, unable to tear their eyes from his striking appearance. Then a rough, feminine voice shattered the silence. "I think I might be in love with Northern." "Huh? What?" Everyone turned to the person who'd just spoken, especially Jessie, who glared with murderous intent. Quickly, as she saw the way they all turned their heads towards her, Vita clarified. "Oh, wait. No, not like that." Jessie glared at her with a daggering look and raised one of her brows. Even Annette had to turn to her side with a frozen look of shock on her face. Vita exhaled and steadied her expression. "My tribe has a belief that teaches us from the moment we're born what a male must be and what a female must be." Her tone softened, as if she was hesitating. "We are predominantly female, trained and taught to be protectors of the male ones. Anyone who must marry us must, of course, be stronger, and there is a standard for that strength." She paused and looked down for a moment. "I am an abomination. My fat body is the complete opposite of what a girl should be. Girls are preferred to be lithe, agile, with an hourglass shape. But I was fat, I was what our standard for men were, and therefore tagged as taboo and abomination. From childhood I trained, lost weight, I did everything to reach the point I am now. However, it simply resulted in me gaining muscle and thickness. My body became overpronounced, and the clan defined that as adulterating the purpose for which we exist. At the end of the day, I was cast out. Afterwards, Ruffsburg found me and sent me to the Dark Continent. I never liked Raven because she was what my clan wanted. Master Annette was the one person I could relate to. We were alike in more ways than one. Of course, she was much stronger than I was." She looked up at everyone. The silence in the room was almost deafening the moment she paused. "Then I met Northern. Strong. Very strong. At first it was denial. A lithe, weak-looking boy shouldn't be so strong. Strong men were supposed to be muscular, and it was supposed to be obvious, so I was at first irritated by his existence and preferred not to associate with him. Then I witnessed his might, over and over again. Then I began to understand. My irritation stemmed from jealousy. I resolved to catch up, but that also quickly blew up in my face. I saw him at the academy, and I had to be real with myself about how delusional I was." She smiled. "When that delusion shattered, it gave way and helped me realize just how much I admired him. Certainly, he has plenty of flaws. His arrogance was unmatched, especially in the Dark Continent. But that didn't erase the value and importance of the hard work he put into growth, the suffering he had to endure. As much as we all had our fair share of suffering in the Dark Continent, at least we were never alone. We had each other. He had no one. It's funny when I think of what we expect from him, like he owed us. He had no obligation, yet always showed up over and over again for us, for people he claimed were not his friends. His actions spoke so much louder than his words." Annette suddenly exclaimed. "Ah! At this point, you might as well write a biography on him already." Raven frowned thoughtfully, considering Annette's words. "Actually, that would make a lot of sense." Annette turned to her, stunned. "What? You too?" "I'm just saying, what if we convert Northern's escapades into songs? Stories? It's a great way to spread his influence." Elitis nodded from where he was seated. "This is an excellent idea. Stories carry information like wildfire. It'll definitely be instrumental in spreading awareness across all nations. And it's even better since we don't need to exaggerate them at all. The Void Lord's story already sounds like an exaggeration." Howe nodded in agreement. "That's valid, and trade points could actually be used strategically to spread this information. But we also have to clarify what we hope to achieve." Raven responded. "Well, since we want to build a kingdom, we first have to spread the word of power and reverence." Byran sat back and watched as the conversation he had orchestrated slowly unfolded on its own without him having to do anything. For him, it was proof enough that this was meant to be. His test had not been the silence or giving everyone a chance to speak their hearts. What he had simply hoped to achieve was to see the direction the silence would lead. It was a reckless play, but not an uncalculated one. If like-minded people were put in a room and they all shared the same purpose, the direction of the conversation would naturally gravitate towards that purpose. If they didn't, it would be scattered. So this was confirmation that indeed, there were no bad spots in the pioneers, at least for now. Lady Hinai and Princess Rahima Nora sat at a table. Rahima Nora was looking down with a somber expression plastered to her face. Hinai had explained everything to her, from her first meeting with Northern, the things he had gone through, and how he came again and saved the entire continent. She clenched her fist. Ruffsburg, I've never liked that man. Lady Hinai chuckled softly, finding Rahima Nora's anger endearing. Then her expression straightened moments later, and she asked, "How did you discover it, though? About his existence? I thought even your father was convinced of his death." Princess Rahima Nora sighed and leaned on the table. "Well, it's a long story, but Reese, he's been missing for 10 years, as you know, and in the course of it all I'd been tracking him. I found him, and I think he knew, then led my trail to Rian's existence to throw me off his back." Lady Hinai frowned. "So that means Reese most likely knows too?" The princess nodded and folded her hands. "But you have nothing to worry about. I will protect Rian." Lady Hinai chuckled lightly. "Oh, I'm not worried, really. Rian now has dependable friends. And after all that I witnessed with my own eyes, do you think I doubt how strong my son is now?" Rahima Nora was so stunned by Hinai's words that she froze for a moment, then laughed. "Amazing! It's so good to see you so relieved." Hinai smiled as well. After the jovial atmosphere calmed, she then asked with a flat tone, "So, what now?" Princess Rahima Nora gave a kind smile. "I'm sure the Emperor will be pleased to see his second wife and lost son again." As Northern stretched his hands and legs with a light groan, he felt his muscles grow taut with relaxation. He slowly opened his eyes to the golden spill of light cascading across the entire scenery. He sat up and crossed his legs into a lotus position, relaxing forward so he didn't have to sit with so much effort, and just continued to stare at the day star sinking into the horizon beyond the sea. The cold wind caused his white hair to dance across his face. It framed his features in a messy halo, the length already draping over his eyes but still parted in the middle, falling over each angle of his face. His eyes were sharper now, deep, and looking nothing like those of a 17-year-old. Nor did they look like those of a 29-year-old. Northern's face was blank, staring at the distant horizon with no readable emotion in his eyes. He replayed his conversation with Cryos, the corruption of Void, the gods, the atrocity the First Origins had committed. And most importantly, the fact that this world was just a feeding ground. The idea of my existence feeding someone suddenly makes me feel so bitter. It also gave him a wider scope on how truly powerful these beings could be, beings who decided to control and spread civilization just so they could be fed and regain their strength. They had even altered the history of the world. Can we even believe the nonsense about history at this point? Northern squinted his eyes for a moment. But then again, as much as this world was a fabricated one, real men walked it. History is made by the actions of men. Even if the First Origins engineered the myths about the foundation of the world, the deeds of so many men were bound to have overshadowed it. Take Milwa, for example. But it didn't dilute the tyranny of their strength in any way. Moreover, Northern had been thinking, "Aoi, I've got a question. Origin, divine, primordial, those are ranks I've never seen." "Correct. Rankings are multi-universally engineered, and so do not conform to the reality of this single universe." Northern scratched his jaw. "So, an origin is still an origin, right?" "Correct. What then is a divine? What power level?" Constellations, gods, celestials fall into this category. Although they may be in the same rank, there is a subrank, with the lowest being constellations and the highest being gods. "Oh!" An interesting smile curled Northern's lips. "After so many years, I finally learned something about gods." It was little, but the progress felt obvious. Northern curled one corner of his lips, thinking of the day when he would finally reach them and make them shiver. But right now, he was too inconsequential for that. What about primordials? Beings above the gods. There is little to no information about the existence of these beings. Fair. Do you think Void is a primordial? Incorrect. The Void is a constellation, a divine one. Northern's eyes widened. Oh? Wow, how do you know? Simple. Only that which is divine can be corrupted. If the first origins wanted a chance to fight the gods, then whatever weapon they created had to have been on almost the same level as the gods. Northern nodded thoughtfully. Hence divinity. And they would have needed to profane divinity to hurt the gods. Divinity cannot harm divinity. After all, Northern's eyes widened with that realization. Indeed, they would have. So they most likely intentionally, from the very beginning, with their own hands, corrupted the Void. Their mother. Correct. Northern smiled broadly. Aoi, I can tell you're going to be useful. Just now? Northern raised a brow. Why do I sense contempt in your tone? Aoi? Are you capable of emotions? Wrong command. Enter proper command. Northern gave the panel in front of him a long gaze and pointed 2 fingers to his eyes, then back to the panel. He sighed and stood up, looking over the vast harbor. A massive tree stood at the edge of the harbor that led to the ruined Luengard Empire. Fewer than 10 buildings were properly standing. Most of them were either razed to the ground or in rubble, as if a sun had exploded on one side and scorched the entire place. Some verdant cocoons were already opened, and people were walking around trying to build shelter. Northern almost couldn't deal with the aftermath of a battle he'd fought. His expression strained slightly, but he exhaled and swallowed it. If he didn't want something like this to happen again, then he needed to create a safe haven for humanity. Ah, what is that? What did I just think? Humanity? The focus should be me. I'm definitely doing this for selfish reasons. Northern tried to convince himself, as much as only he had the power to stop, or be of any substantial help in containing what could be coming for them. He had always hated the heroes of stories, the people on whose shoulders the fate of the world usually fell. They are bound by logic and driven into corners by the weight of responsibility. It's a prison that heroes willingly enter. By their own hands, they take their freedom and shackle it to such things as responsibility, becoming a beacon of hope for a race that will tear you down at the slightest chance they get. He didn't want to be that kind of person. He wanted to be selfish. If humanity would gain anything at all, it would be because he was selfish. And if they lost everything due to his selfishness, then so be it. Yup, it pays to be selfish. That way I can feel better even when they die. And not be hypocritical about it. Northern had come to discover that if there was one thing he'd developed a love-hate relationship with, it was the hypocrisy of human nature. Hypocrisy was essential in the being of mankind, but also could be an heirloom of self-destruction. I guess the key is honesty to your own hypocrisy. Would that be the answer he'd been subconsciously searching for? Honesty to oneself? Perhaps it didn't matter. Even in hypocrisy, selfishness, or ruthlessness, just don't lie to yourself. Northern winced in discomfort, mildly irritated at himself. Good stars. When did I get so philosophical? He let himself fall down the tower. As his body plummeted down, Northern watched his shadows glide through the wall with his fall. The wind suddenly shifted, and he vanished into the shadow on the wall. The next moment, he stood in a wide, four-cornered room. Broken chains dangled from different corners, falling against the pristine white walls of the enclosure. Sitting next to a wall was a man with long black hair and deep eyes. His face was scarred, as were other parts of his body. But there was no blood, just bruised skin, signs of mild torture. He leaned one hand on his raised knee. Black, lusterless shackles bound each wrist and ankle, but the chains that should have connected them to the broken links on the wall were also severed. Northern continued forward and stopped barely 3 meters away from him. His voice called out gently. "Call." Call raised his head, looking at Northern with an unreadable expression. He shifted tiredly. "Umph! Have you finally come to execute me?" Northern looked at him with a hint of surprise. He glanced at the floor, and a simple chair manifested out of the ground. He sat and rested his elbows on his knees, leaning toward Call. "Execute you? My best friend." Call's gaze darkened for a moment. Then he suddenly burst into wild laughter. The laughter subsided like a receding flood. Then his darkened gaze returned, shooting at Northern with a hint of disdain. "This?" He shook the manacles on his wrists. "This is how you treat your best friend?" Northern scoffed and shrugged. "It's not like you were exactly hospitable, Call. Back in the Crimson Mine, my first habitable space was much worse than this, and you made me sleep in a ruined bedroom only to send assassins after me the next moment. So I think we both have questionable hospitality, but I'm fairly better." The tyrant's face twisted with hatred. "What do you want? Why are you keeping me alive?" Northern smiled at him, almost delighted. "You're in such a rush to die. That's suspicious, Call. I'm keeping you alive because you haven't killed yourself. These reflections you can make, they come at a cost, don't they? At first I thought it was your soul splitting, but then I couldn't quite understand it. I guess it has more to do with the people or monsters you've devoured. But this one right here is you, a reflection of your own self, not the ones you consumed." Northern straightened his back. "So you can't destroy it using other reflections. However, if I kill you, that may help rather than hurt you. That's my guess. Either way, it won't hurt to keep you alive as a prisoner. I mean, look around, there's no door. How exactly are you going to escape? And those chains? You can go wherever you want in the entire world, but once I pull the other ends connected to the corners, you'll be dragged here like an animal, even if you're in the underworld." Northern shook his head, in awe of the chains. "I must say, the first Origins really considered the Chaos Prince's elusive nature when they created this chain. Owning the tower was the only way he could have escaped it. That sly devil." His gaze fell on Call, spilling disappointment. "Since when have you been working with him, pretending to serve another master while pursuing your own selfish reasons? Stars, I almost thought you were different." Call did not respond. His glare of hatred just bored into Northern. Meanwhile, Northern leaned back in the chair, giving Call a disarming smile. "All of this, you did it so you could have enough power to fight your father, didn't you? Does the Chaos Prince know? Does he know that you're like him?" Call's eyes suddenly flinched at that moment, and his brows furrowed. Northern's smile widened at the corner of his lips. "What? You're surprised I figured it out? It's not so difficult to piece together. I mean, you're the one who went on rambling before killing Lieutenant Dante. And we might not have been close, but I'm still going to avenge his death, just so you know. It will hurt like hell when I'm ready." Call gave Northern a wide, baiting grin. "I'll be waiting. Perhaps you'll taste just as delicious as he did." Northern glanced at him with a downcast look. "You want to sink to cheap taunts now? Or maybe that man, the red-haired one that Dante killed. I'm sure he would have tasted." Wham! His face swung to the side and smacked the wall, immediately sending small webbed cracks spreading across its surface. Northern slowly withdrew his hand, studying his palm. "Crap! Controlling my physical strength is harder than I thought." His face returned to a disarming smile. "But at least I didn't break your neck. That would have been humiliating. Imagine someone of your caliber dying to a slap." "Ha ha ha." He laughed. Meanwhile, Call just stared down in shock, his face red and bruised. Northern finally stood and lifted the wooden chair. He studied it. This should work." Call slowly looked at him, unsure what he was about to do. His brows creased. "What are you doing? I thought you weren't going to kill me." Northern smirked like a vile devil. "Of course, that's the point of this chair. If I were to pummel you with my fists, I can't be sure you won't die. But then, didn't you intend to taunt me into a rage by daring to speak of Burning Storm in that manner?" Call's frown deepened. Indeed, it had been what he'd aimed for, but he had expected that Northern would act out of anger and crush him. So why was he calmly gripping a chair and grinning like he was about to have a hearty meal after starving for a week? Oh, Call. I'm going to enjoy beating you with a chair. Northern smacked the chair down on his head. The tyrant raised his arms over his head, yelling and screaming. How dare you? You demon! You vermin! Stop this insult! Hit me properly. Please. Hit me properly. Please, Northern. Ah. Oh. And Northern was grinning and responding. Oh, I dare. Yes, that's me. Beg harder. You need to put more heart into begging. Northern beat the hell out of Call with the chair, breaking it until nothing was left but splinters.